Release that which I by Ermu. Chapter 741, The Art of Sound Transmission. Roland wiped the fine sweat beads from Anna's forehead and held her in his arms. In the dim light, he could still see the attractive blush on her face. Roland had the feeling that Anna had become more active in this regard since the last time they talked about the dream world. She also tried to learn some new tricks, though her progress was much slower than her learning from books. Anna's clumsy and serious manner gave him an entirely new experience. His visual enjoyment far surpassed the sensory experience, and he could not help but feel a sense of superiority as an old hand. Of course, they would not miss the storytelling session after their time of joy. As he was indulging in Anna's fragrance, Roland started to narrate in detail the news brought by the tequila witches as well as his speculation about the battle of divine will. Although we've already known that where we live is no larger than a corner of the mainland, I didn't expect that there were actually completely different civilizations scattered beneath the mountains. This world is really full of unknowns. Anna sighed and said, perhaps one day, we can also set foot on that faraway land to see what kind of secrets are hidden in that world across the sea. I promise that day will come, Roland answered with a smile. Even if they could not travel by sea, they could still fly over it. Any land that could be seen through the telescope would not be too far away. As long as they had the internal combustion engine, the large airship could come into play. But does God really exist? He left relics causing us to fight against one another. Maybe he is now looking at us from somewhere. Are you afraid? Roland could not resist holding her even closer. No, I want to thank him. What for? Roland was a little surprised. For he sent you to me. Anna looked up and whispered. Roland saw the rippling blue lake in her eyes. That was her unconcealed emotions. He felt a warm current surging in his heart. I'll always be with you. But you can't stay with me all the time. Anna covered his mouth before he could finish speaking. You're the king and also the future commander of the army that will combat the army of demons. How could you stay forever in Neverwinter? I can't possess you entirely just for my personal desire. The soldiers who fight in the front line need to see your presence and your subjects in the other cities want you to be with them, she said softly. Roland, I'm already very content that I can listen to your stories like this. Roland was silent for a moment. You're right. But wherever I am in the future, you will always be able to hear my stories. I promise you this. Anna blinked, as if she had heard the meaning behind his words. Without the sigil of listening? Exactly. He nodded. How could they speak out their words of love if they had to communicate through the sigil of listening? What are you going to do? I'll let you know tomorrow. Roland rolled over and lay on top of Anna, then kissed her neck, and slipped all the way from her neck to the clavicle, leaving a shallow mark on her fine, tight skin. But, now it's my turn. Once again, they became one, and their sweet breathing sounds rising and falling for a long time before fading away. The next day after breakfast, the invigorated Roland walked into the backyard of North Slope Mountain with Anna. Good morning, Your Majesty. Lucia, who had arrived even earlier, put her work aside and bowed before him. Good morning, Your Majesty. Good morning, Sister Anna. Sister Nightingale. Ring followed the actions of her sister, and started to bow and cry out cheerfully. Roland waved his hand with a smile, indicating that they did not have to be too formal. Then he walked to the workbench and pulled out a piece of white paper on which he started to draw a design. He intended to carry out the promise he had made last night to Anna before the tequila survivors moved to the western region, a communication tool that he could use to speak to Anna at any time without magic. That would be the wire telephone. The principle of the telephone was very simple, and that was the most basic application of electromagnetic induction. The sound wave would vibrate the metal reed in the voice tube, causing the change of the magnetic flux formed in the magnetic field, and finally a fluctuant-induced current would be generated. While the earpiece, on the contrary, would use the magnetic force generated by the electromagnetic coil to vibrate the membrane and reduce the current into voice. In other words, it was fundamentally the same as a generator or an electric motor, except that the latter turned the vibration into a rotation and had a much larger power. As soon as he articulated his idea and design, Anna immediately understood how this unprecedented calling tool worked. "Let me get Mystery Moon and Soraya." Her eyes shone with excitement. Electric current, exchange with voice? After hearing what Roland had said, Nightingale still had a vacant look on her face, and when she turned to see if Lucia had understood, she found Lucia was also pondering. Electricity and magnetism originate from each other, and the magnetism turns into power. I see. Even the little girl ring also showed off her knowledge. Sister, are you talking about something in the second chapter of elementary physics? All of these reactions suddenly frustrated Nightingale. She gloomily picked up a dried fish and walked into the mist. Roland could not hold back his laughter at this scene. He knew that although the principle was simple, it was not that easy to make a functional phone, and the problem lay in the signal transmission. The electrical signal would abate. That was the reason why the phone was not widely used in the early stage after it was invented. Once the distance between the callers was too long, it was hard for one side to hear exactly what the other side was saying. The phone was not widely used until the electron tube that could amplify the signal was invented. Roland was not very good at electricity, so he barely wrote about it in his books. Even now that he had the help of the dream world, he still found it quite problematic to make an electron tube. Since he did not intend to amplify the signal, there was only one way to do it, by reducing the attenuation. For example, increase the size of the wire and reduce the loss of the signal in the route. The former was very simple to achieve. The required copper wire could be accurately processed by Anna's black fire. According to the knowledge he had acquired from his dream world, a 4 mm diameter wire could be used to maintain a 50 or 60 km communication without a repeater, while the general telephone connecting wire was only 0.4 to 0.6 mm in diameter. Although it was somewhat wasteful to use the thick wire, it could effectively avoid the trouble of having to make a signal amplifier. The latter could be achieved through coaxial cable. The so-called coaxial cable was made by wrapping the wire with a layer of metal mesh which would be sandwiched by the two wires that were coated with insulating materials and turned into a Faraday cage so as to minimize the divergence of the electrical signal. Before the telephone came into widespread use, the technology of wrapping the metal layer was not mature yet, so at that time, people used the loading coil, which meant overlapping the wire with a spirally wound coil casing to reduce the signal loss. But Roland did not need to follow this rule since he had Anna's processing skill and Soraya's special coating that could complete it in one step. Chapter 742, Love from a Distance. Combining the two techniques should allow the telephone signal to be read as far as a few hundred kilometers without a relay, which basically lets it cover most of the residential areas in the western region, and would allow Neverwinter to receive real-time updates from the defensive line in the impassable mountain range. If he wanted to further extend the range, he would then have to use a signal relay. The reason why Roland chose to develop the wire telephone was not only because he was inspired by Anna's words, but also because of the vast usage and practicability of this tool. It would serve as a crucial piece for controlling the political situation, enhancing the centralization of the government, and commanding the wartime efforts. More importantly, the industrial projects in Neverwinter had already reached a saturation point. The new immigrants still had to pass the primary education before they can be absorbed into the various industries. The four major industries, civil construction, mineral processing, machine manufacturing, and chemical production, had occupied over 90% of the workforce. According to current predictions, it would not be difficult for these four industries to employ 60,000 to 70,000 new immigrants once they pass through primary education. As these industries were vital for future war efforts, their production could not be interrupted. On the other hand, the bicycle plant, which was enthusiastically built by Roland in the beginning, wasn't even able to meet the demand of the First Army. The City Hall would first shut down the bicycle factory whenever there is a power shortage and reallocate the workers to the steam engine plant whenever there is a shortage of manpower. Even though construction on Kingdom Main Street and Route 67 had already been completed, and border area neither raised horses nor stables for horses to rest in, the roads were still mainly used by carriages that came from the Longsong area or other cities. Also, with the construction of the railway already underway, the citizens never did start riding bicycles between the border area and the Longsong area. Of course, Roland would never admit to Berev that he had made this strategic mistake. Since then, he would always take into account of Neverwinter's production capability when planning for new facilities. The phone happened to be a good product that wouldn't burden Neverwinter's output, and it also does not require much maintenance. First of all, Roland would not provide telephone to the market. He would only provide it for military communication purposes and basic communication between the border area and the Longsong area. Roland only intended to lay down a one-to-one cable that connects both sides. In this way, it would save him the time and energy of setting up a complex wire network. Secondly, starting with a limited number of telephone systems meant that it would only require Anna, Mystery Moon, and Soraya to help out during their spare time without having to utilize Neverwinter's labor force. Moreover, once they managed to produce vacuum tubes, they could develop telecommunication for the public. Therefore, the wire telephone is the most appropriate project to start with before exploring the Great Snow Mountain with the tequila survivors. The prototyping stage of manufacturing phones went smoother than he had expected. By afternoon, 2 basic telephones containing magnetic speakers appeared in the backyard of North Slope Mountain. It had no shell and looked like an assembly of a coil of wire and magnets. It was equipped with a hand-operated generator and a mini Dawn battery. Due to the low power requirements, the battery was only as thick as a finger and could last for at least a month, saving him from the trouble of making an independent dry battery. How does this work? Mystery Moon asked curiously, can my ability really do this? Roland naturally ignored the second half of her sentence. It's very simple. Watch carefully. This hand-operated generator is used to start a call. When the user rotates it quickly, he grabs the handle and rotates it forcibly, and the magnetic bell on the other side suddenly rang out a sound of jingling. That ringing means that there's a call coming. He gave Anna a glance, and she picked up the earpiece and the voice tube. When the earpiece is picked up and the switch pops up, it means the voice line is connected and people on both sides can start talking. The current that transmits the electrical signals is provided by Mini Dawn, so without this copper bar enchanted by Mystery Moon, the telephone can only ring but no sound would be transmitted. Oh, I see. Mystery Moon thrust her chest out and vigorously nodded her head twice. Your Majesty, may I try speaking through it? Soraya was eager to try. And me. Ring raised her hand up high. Of course. It was created by all of you, and naturally, you're eligible to be the first few to experience this era-defining communication tool. Roland laughed. There was no need to explain the significance of the phone, since it completely changed how humans could communicate with each other across distant worlds. There will be no signal attenuation in such a small yard, so connecting the phone with ordinary copper wire will do. In a quiet, snow-covered forest, a crisp bell rang out continuously. Obviously, they could talk through the phone directly, but they insisted on starting over again, from the step of rotating the handle to generate electricity. There really is a voice. It sounds like Lucia. What should I say? Let her guess who you are. The witches, who were separated by the wall, were vying to shout at the voice tube. For a few moments, peals of laughter echoed from both ends of the yard. Roland also tried out listening twice. To be honest, he thought the prototype wasn't very good. The voice he heard fluctuated a lot and there was a lot of static. Anyways, it was definitely not up to standard. But he knew that as long as he kept adjusting the size of the metal reed and the space between the electromagnets, he would find the right parameters for the best call quality. Soon, the voice tube reached Roland's hand once again. He shook his head with a smile and placed the earpiece beside his ear and habitually said, "Hello?" He heard nothing but interference from the weak conductance of the copper cable. For some reason, he knew who it was on the other side of the phone as if their hearts were linked. "Anna," Roland whispered. After a moment, he heard a slightly distorted reply. "I like you." Roland. After protecting Roland for a whole day, Nightingale returned to her bedroom in a bad mood. This was not the first time she felt like this because she did not understand anything that the others were saying. And every time this happened, only dried fish and ice cream bread could comfort her. Well, now there were also the chaos drinks. She truly envied the intimacy between Roland and Anna. Meanwhile, a faint but unceasing bitterness flooded her. She thought that she would get used to it sooner or later, but it turned out to be harder than she had imagined. The more invested she got in her feelings, the deeper the thorns dug into her heart. Now Nightingale somewhat understood what Wendy had told her. She walked to the table and pulled open the drawer, but she found out that the bottle inside was empty. Did I take the wrong one? So she pulled open another drawer and found that bottle inside was empty too. Wendy? My chaos. As soon as Nightingale turned around, she was hugged by her roommate, and Wendy's ample bosom almost squeezed her out of breath. Nightingale, how many years have we known each other? You've been with me since you left the Guyland family in Silver City, right? Yeah, almost 4 or 5 years, but my chaos. We've experienced so many dangers and hardships along the way before today. Nothing can undermine our friendship, right? Of course, I've always treated you like a sister, but my chaos. I drank all your drinks. I'm sorry. Wendy held her even closer. I'll definitely make it up to you with my share next month. What? All of them? Nightingale fumbled the bag of dried fish and felt that it was empty too. Only dried fish, ice cream bread, and chaos drinks can comfort her. Now, all of them were gone. Nightingale heard a crack in her heart. In an instant, the bitterness flooded her once again. Chapter 743, The Desert Mission. Even with his eyes closed, Iron Axe could still smell the unique odor of the yellow sands around him. Today was the 4th day since he had entered the desert and the 3rd week since his army had left Neverwinter. After the end of this week, 2/3 of the winter season would have passed and the coldest period, midwinter, would start. However, unlike the snowy western region, the months of demons had less influence here, leaving the area almost untouched. Although the sky maintained a shade of oppressive gray, there was at least no piercing northerly wind and icy snow that could freeze the whole desert. As Silver Stream did not converge with any other rivers and flowed mainly underground, the army had no choice but to make its way on foot. Rather than following the original plan, which was to wait for the 500 new recruits who were stationed in the Palisade City to be ready and then incorporating them into the army to move together, Iron Axe decided to leave those recruits to Brian and marched alone so that he could reach Iron Sand City faster. Recruits might perform well during on-the-spot firing, but they would not be able to survive a journey of continuous marching on foot. Moreover, the situation would barely be improved even with the addition of 500 people. He understood very well that His Majesty's mission could not be accomplished by cannon attack or aggression. The First Army would be there to ensure victory, but it would not be the means to conquer the Sand Nation. Majins had a set of traditional solutions. As for the 500 recruits, all they needed to do was seize Silver Stream Oasis to ensure that the frontline troops would not be flanked. In the southernmost region, an oasis was a lifeline. Whether people intended to attack or flee, they could not live without an oasis. The tribal people of the Sand Nation could feel the formidable vigor coming from the veteran soldiers who were marching orderly on the road even without witnessing the power of the flintlocks. No one dared to walk up and question the soldiers coming from Grey Castle but just whispered behind them after they had filled their water packs, got fed, and set out again. Iron Axe estimated that, at this rate, the First Army should be able to reach Iron Sand City before nightfall. I'm a little confused. Can one initiate the so-called holy duel at any time in any season? A beautiful blonde woman walked toward Echo and her fine skin was in sharp contrast to that of the princess of the Osha clan. Even noblemen could refuse the honor challenge between themselves if they were unwell. On such a cold day, everyone would want to stay near a warm stove the entire day instead of going out and fighting, right? I mean, what should we do if someone refuses the request for a holy duel? Iron Axe remembered the lady's name was Andrea, a combat witch who often followed Princess Tilly. As His Majesty once said, there ought to be just one extraordinary, Ashes, to help them, but somehow Andrea ended up joining the campaign as well. No matter how unwilling you are, you have to fight when someone picks up an axe, rushes into your house, and kicks your stove. Ashes curled her lip. Do you think this contest which, to some extent, determines the life and death of a clan will follow the hypocritical rules of the nobility? That's called a sneak attack or a massacre, not a duel, Andrea said disdainfully. Even though Majins are barbarians, they're still able to distinguish between the two. Do you think that everyone is as ignorant as you? I can see you really are a well-learned person by saying that in front of Echo. Stop misinterpreting my words. Iron Axe was not bothered about being called a barbarian, as he knew that people in Border Town were not judged by their identities. This was something His Majesty had told him personally. Other than being a Majin, he had a more important identity, and that was being a resident of Neverwinter. Iron Axe did not respond to the dispute between Ashes and Andrea until he received Echo's gaze calling for help. He cleared his throat and explained voluntarily. Lady Andrea's concern was not misplaced. Certainly, the holy duel can't be refused and must be done when both opponents are well prepared to earn the approval from the three gods. But it doesn't mean that the duel can be initiated at any time by anyone's will. The first requirement for the duel is that the challenger must be qualified to fight. What kind of qualifications are needed? First of all, it must be an entire Majin clan, Iron Axe said briefly. One person can't represent a clan, and this rule applies to even a chief or a princess. This rule is to prevent a situation where a dozen people occupy 1/6 of Iron Sand City. In addition, the rule also excludes foreigners. Iron Sand City allows foreigners to fight for the clans but excludes them from the central power positions. Does that mean that we are not eligible at all? Ashes raised her eyebrow. It has been years since Echo was exiled and the Osha clan has disappeared long ago. Or should we start by looking for her surviving clansmen? No one is able to survive Endless Cape, Iron Axe said as he shook his head, but we can use another method. For example, making Lady Silvermoon the chief of a new clan is allowed. Is this possible? Andrea was surprised. Majins don't value bloodlines like you people do. They value one's ability more than lineage. The commander-in-chief of the First Army said calmly, after satisfying the first criterion, any clan that is able to stand their ground in one of the small oases around the Iron Sand City qualifies for the duel. There are a total of 4 small oases that newly rising clans always fight in, and that's why these 4 oases are also called the Bloodstained Place. They are like admission tickets, right? Ashes did not take it seriously. You could say that. In fact, these clans generally fall into 2 categories, Iron Axe paused, challenger, and watchdog. Watchdog? The blonde witch's curiosity was piqued. These are the obstacles set by the top clans who are unwilling to see the order in Iron Sand City change too much. Echo was the one who replied this time. They rely on their huge resources and influence to recruit a large number of warriors to form a mixed clan that has its roots in the small oases. Watchdogs won't seek a holy duel with their owners, yet they occupy the positions of the challenger. Despite not being allowed to enter Iron Sand City, they live quite well relying on the water and food supplied by the small oases. They sound like hounds that are willing to eat leftovers. Ashes sneered. That is a very appropriate name. As the holy duel is full of variables, the big clans would try to rope in or bribe the potential challengers stationed in the bloodstained place. My father was reluctant to be a watchdog, so he was determined to initiate a holy duel with Iron Whip clan, yet he ended up with. Echo's voice became despondent as she was reminded of her distressing past. They'll pay for their insidious behavior that year, Lady Silvermoon. Iron Axe comforted her. Death is coming for them now. So we need to find a challenger first, whose chief will be replaced by Echo, before we challenge the 6 big clans? Andrea asked. Once people start to settle down, they'll lose their motivation to go forward. One who has occupied a small oasis and doesn't challenge others immediately will very likely become a new watchdog. After that, it won't be easy to overpower him by words or by force, Iron Axe said slowly. Since we are under the king's order and carrying thunder and grace with us, there is no need to do it in such an inconvenient way. Any humble clan will become unstoppable with the first army backing it up. We will just crush anyone who dares to stand in His Majesty's way. Chapter 744, One Who Seeks a Revenge. Thurum's favorite activity was sitting on the second floor of a tavern and watching customers coming and going downstairs. This was his tavern and his territory, so Thurum named it Skull Cup for his own preference and redecorated it. He even hung a string of incomplete skulls at the entrance as the sign of the tavern. However, it was not called this name 5 years ago. What was it called at that time? Thurum wondered. Was it called Elf Forest, or Elf Garden? Anyway, it doesn't matter now. Thurum drank some spirits with fire lantern fruit in them, letting the hot taste flood his tongue. Such a delicate name didn't fit the blood-stained place, since there's no elf or elf-like woman here but quite a lot of bones. After each battle, a pile of dead bodies would be left outside the Iron Sand City. He preferred bones, especially the skulls, which had been baked in hot sands, rather than perishable flesh. First, the skulls were intimidating, so it would let troublemakers understand what kind of place this was. Second, it indeed could hold wine, saving him from buying more wine glasses. After all, the former did not work for everyone. There were always some idiots born with deformed brains who thought that they could treat everywhere like their own backyards and that their adversaries were no better than women who knew nothing but weeping. In a place where troublemakers appeared frequently, brittle pottery and glass were not ideal vessels. Gazing at every customer was a habit that Thurum had developed in recent years. People who traveled in and out of this land were generally divided into 3 kinds, the half-dead ones, the moribund ones, and the dead ones. He preferred to distinguish people in this way rather than by their identities. The half-dead ones' purpose of coming here was very simple, which was drinking, gambling, and women. As long as they maintained their current state, they could basically finish the rest of their journeys. The moribund ones were mostly watchdogs or challengers who came to inquire about the situation. They had already put their lives under the blades that would swing and behead them at any time. As to the dead ones, they were undoubtedly the troublemakers. Thurum's attention was fixed on neither the half-dead ones nor the dead ones, for the former were very boring, and the latter gave him joy only when they were dying. It was the moribund ones he liked most because he could see in them a mirror image of his younger self. At that time, he was just like them, holding a sharp knife in his hand and fighting in the blood-stained place, an admiring place for many clans, yet he always had his sights set on Iron Sand City. His courage, audacity, and strength were being drained from him until one day someone replaced him as the new owner of the small oasis. He had to beg for a chance to survive. At last, he became part of the blood-stained place, yet he turned from the moribund one into the half-dead one during this alteration. The moribund ones, though they had already placed their lives under the blades, still had the chance to skyrocket when the time came. They could break out of the cocoons or rise from the ashes. But the half-dead ones would never have this kind of opportunity. They could only seek some form of entertainment to comfort them for the rest of their lives. Such as, watching the travelers who pass by these oases, who might perish in the sands or take over as the new owner of this place. At this moment, one of his men pushed open the door, walked to him, and whispered in his ear. "Oh? Are you sure about that?" Thurum was startled. He said so, and from the look of the woman beside him, she is probably a divine lady. Thurum pondered for a while, then a malicious smile appeared on his face. "Take them in. Remember to take away their weapons. This guy is a hard nut to crack." "Yes. See? There's a big fun coming now," Thurum could not help thinking. There were a total of 2 visitors whose bodies were hidden under loose ropes, but Thurum could still distinguish that they were a man and a woman. When the tall man took off his hood and showed his face, Thurum could not help but squint. "I didn't expect to see you one day, Iron Axe. The things that you can't expect are way more than stars reflected on the oasis. Nothing strange about that." Iron Axe served the woman her seat, and then calmly walked over to sit opposite him. "But now, you should know what I'm coming for." "Probably." Thurum shrugged. As an old citizen of Sand Nation, he knew every holy duel held in the Land of Fire. Some of the moribund ones could indeed rise from ashes, but most of them turned into complete dead bodies, and the Osha clan was one of them. Although he had heard that some accidents happened during the duel, it made no difference to the end result. But you shouldn't have returned, for Iron Whip clan is no longer the way it was. Thuram had thought of recruiting Iron Axe, who used to be quite a renowned hybrid warrior. Thuram didn't let his initial ambition die away even after he had to serve a watchdog, and he always imagined that his clan would one day reoccupy the small oasis and enter the holy land of the duel. But it was years ago. But now, he just wanted to have some fun. Yeah? That's exactly what I want, Iron Axe said with disapproval. I thought they'd been thrown out of Iron Sand City by the other challengers and were now rotting away in some isolated corner. Now it seems that the three gods haven't completely fallen asleep. Thuram frowned, for he did not remember that this hybrid warrior was a man of grandiloquence. I understand your eagerness for the revenge. But a revenge carried out by someone who's not qualified is nothing less than suicide. As he said this, he turned to look at the silent woman. Even though the Osha clan owns a divine lady, it won't narrow the gap between your clan and the Iron Whip clan. Moreover, since most of the exiles of that year had already died, what difference can you make with just the two of you? That's why I have come to you, Thuram, Iron Axe said. The words he said seemed very natural to himself but made Thuram's heart thud. Iron Axe continued, your clan is still located in this oasis, am I right? 8 years ago, it was a challenger, just like Osha clan, and should have had a chance to control part of Iron Sand City but ended up being a watchdog, and later, it became less than a watchdog. Seeing your clansmen reduced to being slaves of other clans, didn't you feel remorseful? Now we offer you a chance to, once again, touch the wall of Iron Sand City if you pledge your loyalty to Lady Drow Silvermoon. Thuram was stunned for a moment before he burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. It was indeed a rare joke, since there was nothing more interesting than seeing a mad Avenger destroy himself, but Thuram did not expect that this man was trying to divert the joke to him. So you want to make this little girl the new chief of a clan before initiating a holy duel? Even her father is not above me, and now you want me to serve her? Perhaps you can find some good helpers who will be able to do some tricks in the duel, but what can I benefit from this? Call my slave clansmen to fight against the watchdogs till they are left with a mass of injuries, and then warmly send you to Iron Sand City? Thuram's tone turned a bit hideous on the final words. Tell me, Iron Axe, what benefits can you offer me so that I won't tell the Iron Whip clan the whereabouts of this Miss Drow Silvermoon in exchange for a generous reward? I guess they'll be very interested in torturing a divine lady of their former enemy. Chapter 745, Furious Thunder. Iron Axe didn't fly into a rage as had been expected. He didn't even have a change in facial expression, which surprised Thuram slightly. Thuram remembered that in the past, this mixed blood would never allow anyone to threaten the Princess of Osha, not even verbally. He couldn't help but look over at Drow Silvermoon, only to find the divine lady had no reaction either. It appeared as if she did not care about her own safety at all. What were they thinking? Thuram felt for the god stone of retaliation in his pocket, his fierce expression frozen on his face. In fact, I'd never rest or hope on you to defeat the watchdogs. Since you didn't do it 8 years ago, I know you don't have the guts. At least you're not as brave as you claim, Iron Axe slowly said. I'm not returning only for revenge. His first half of his words stung Thuram to his core, but the second half slightly shocked him. Not just for revenge? I'm going to challenge the 6 clans to make Osha the strongest clan. Iron Axe said word by word. Although the clans in Iron Sand City managed the oasis together, they were not considered equal. It was universally acknowledged that the strongest would occupy the best area in the city. If another clan desired that area, they had to challenge the clans that ranked above them. For the Osha clan, which had nothing, it meant they had to defeat all 6 of the clans to take the core area of Iron Sand City. Only a crazy person would try to do that. The path of challenges could not be interrupted once it had started, which meant that they had to win 6 challenges in succession. Each battle would require a ridiculous amount of physical exertion. This will make people desperate, not to mention their opponents would be first-class Majin warriors. Generally speaking, it takes clan warriors over 6 months to recover from a holy duel. If a warrior died, a new one had to be recultivated or recruited. Basically, the clans with the most resources have the most solid foundations. Wildflame, the first clan, had occupied the position for decades. Avengers varied greatly, so it was hard to classify them. Some of them hit their mark on the first shot, while others lost everything. It was not unusual to see some of them hesitate or even give up during preparation. So they might be half dead, the moribund, or dead. Undoubtedly, only a crazy man would belong to the last type. That left nothing to talk about. Thuram found that he no longer enjoyed listening to them. They were biting off more than they could chew by attempting to avenge the Iron Whip clan. Not to mention they were even claiming they would challenge the whole Iron Sand City? Just thinking of it made him anxious. He had no intention of being implicated in the trouble, so he directly shouted, "Boys, catch this guy as well as that woman." There were 4 clansmen standing in the room and 2 standing outside the door. All of them were holding sharp blades and god stones. They already had an advantage in numbers. In addition, Iron Axe and the Divine Lady's weapons had been confiscated before they entered the room. No matter how strong Iron Axe was, it would be impossible for them to escape. I should be greatly rewarded for killing the mixed blood and for giving the descendant of Osha to the Iron Whip clan, he thought. Maybe I can regain my position as the watchdog for this small oasis. Just then, the Princess of Osha stood up and sneered, while she took off her hood, removing the thin veil that covered her face. Her dark hair cascaded down her shoulders as her beautiful face was revealed. She was indeed a divine lady, but she was not Drow Silvermoon who Thuram was familiar with. None of the Sand Women would have a snow-white complexion like her. Her long dark hair spilled down her back like a waterfall and her golden pupils shone with dangerous light. Who are? Thuram hadn't even finished his words, while the woman easily dodged a strike from a clansman in front of her and then punched another clansman in his face. The dark-haired divine lady didn't need to use a weapon, her fists were actually more powerful than iron hammers. With a muffled thump, the clansman directly in front of her had been knocked into the air and smashed through the wooden wall, falling from the 2nd floor. You? As he finished his query, a second clansman had been hit and also thrown through the wall. The tavern immediately fell into chaos. A chilly gust of wind blew in, swaying the flames in the fireplace. The divine lady didn't stop fighting, instead, she moved as if dancing with the wind. Her shadow was amplified by the firelight and it horrified Thuram. Why? Didn't my clansmen all wear God's Stone of Retaliation? He had bought the god stones from Grey Castle with lots of gold royals. Common people deserved to have a chance when fighting the divine ladies, but why was she not restrained by the magic stone at all? The 4th clansman fell to the ground, spitting blood. He had been kicked in the spine by her from behind and almost snapped him in half. Even a diving 4-winged eagle couldn't hit more powerfully than that. No one lasted more than 1 round. In just a moment, Iron Axe, the Divine Lady, and Thuram were the only ones left standing. Damn it, come here quickly, all of you. Someone is causing trouble on the 2nd floor. Where's our head? Why the hell didn't you watch the door? A guest has been smashed to death. Rapid footsteps could be heard on the stairs. By the sound of it, many people were coming to the head's room. Unfortunately, the tip of a blade had been placed against Thuram's throat. Wait, don't come in, all of you. He shouted at the door, regardless of the piercing pain where the blade had nicked his skin. A cold sweat oozed from the pores on his forehead. Head? Go downstairs. Now. Thuram sadly found that Iron Axe had been right, and his courage was indeed less than what he claimed. In the face of a death threat, his first thought was to compromise rather than fight against it. Perhaps, from the beginning, he was never a moribund who had the hope of rising from the ashes like a phoenix. Instead, he was a half-dead who was trapped by his hesitation. Now can we talk about it? Iron Axe said calmly. Even if I promised, nothing would change. The watchdogs here are supported by the Iron Whip and Cut Bone clans. You have made such a mess here. Do you think they won't know it? Iron Sand City will hear the news tomorrow. Thuram growled, "It's impossible to summon the clansmen within such a short time. Besides, most of them have become slaves to other clans. Even if they're willing to come back, they'll be defeated easily by the warriors cultivated by the larger clans. If you don't want to die here, you'd better escape from the oasis now. As I said before, I didn't expect you to defeat the watchdogs." Thuram grit his teeth and thought, what does he mean? If he really is so powerful, why doesn't he become a challenger directly? Why does he want my support? Unless the force he gathered hadn't been from the southernmost region. When the realization hit, the old head felt his heart tremble in horror. Did they launch the holy duel in the name of another clan? Suddenly, they heard thunder dully break twice outside the window. It was not very loud and seemed to come from a great distance. Surprisingly, Thuram did not see any lightning streaking across the sky. Common sense would dictate that lightning should precede thunder. Suddenly, the expression on Iron Axe's face finally changed. "Listen, thunder is coming." Chapter 746, A Burning Night. The light from the explosion flashed like a firefly in the night. Dana raised his telescope and looked toward the oasis. The burning torches became the best way to find their targets. The torches became more intensive the closer they were to Iron Sand City. Thousands of flashing flames clearly illuminated the camp of Sand Nation, which was the main target of the artillery battalion. After a while, the sound of a large explosion came from the depths of the oasis. "The landing locations seem a bit unorganized," muttered Cat's Claw, who was also observing. "That's the best we could do. You know, it's difficult to set the cannon on the sand, so we can only use the first shots as tests." Jop replied while loading the shell into the barrel for the next firing. "Anyway, try to shoot further. If the shell falls on the head of His Excellency Iron Axe, we'll be done for. Rest assured. The tavern is far from the camp. If we hit it by mistake, the shooting manuals written by the sages should be rewritten." Rodney tightened the firing rope and shouted, "Ready. Fire." Banner nodded. The two Longsong cannons fired again with deafening roars. Flames that escaped from the muzzle briefly lit up the ground in front of them and raised enough dust to hit them on their faces, causing the crowd to shut their eyes. The small oasis was not really a town. It was merely a fortress formed by the clans outside Iron Sand City. None of the houses were made of brick and stone, and most of them were just tents of leather and cloth except some small buildings and watch towers. Therefore, the damage from the Longsong cannons was surprisingly good. Banner noticed that no matter where the shell landed, the area would be dark for a second but soon light up again. The explosion knocked over tents and torches, and then the oil of torches mixed with other flammable building material, forming more dazzling flames. This was the first time the artillery battalion of 1st Army had to use the method of measuring distances and arranging artillery positions according to the firing table. The result could not be described as ideal, but fortunately, the vulnerable and flammable targets made up for this flaw. After several rounds of shooting, the camp of the Sand Nation had been lit into a large fire, while several bright flames were spreading with the help of the roaring evening wind. It was going to ignite the entire oasis. Though he was not experiencing the power of artillery firsthand, Banner could imagine exactly what sort of predicament the so-called watchdogs were now in. Overwhelming and unavoidable, this was the Lord of War praised by His Majesty. "Praise the cannon! Praise the large caliber cannon!" He proudly glanced at the gun battalion, lying in ambush, and the machine gun squads on both sides and once again felt fortunate that he had made the right choice. The future of warfare would be dominated by cannons. As for flintlocks, they would only be suitable for supporting the cannons or clearing the battlefield, but nothing more. It was after quite a while before Thuram recovered from the earth-shattering explosions. Until now, his ears had been buzzing, as if he had been slapped in his face. Was that the thunder that Iron Axe had mentioned? After deep thunder and sharp howls, a watchtower not far from the tavern was suddenly engulfed by a fireball and the whole tower split into pieces within seconds. At the same time, the roar of the explosion caused his ears to lose hearing for a moment. Through the smashed holes in the wall, He saw many tents were ignited by the splashing bonfire and then became even larger bonfires. People screamed and ran out of the fire, rolling and struggling on the ground in an attempt to quench the flames. Unfortunately, few of them were lucky enough to do that. Some of the sand people near the watchtower fell down unconscious. They were not fatally injured, but they could never stand up again. Damn, this was not thunder, but heavenly fire falling into the mortal world. Only the Heavenly Father could have such a terrible power. Thuram thought such a violent attack would not last long, but he soon found himself to be wrong. He heard the sound of thunder every couple of minutes, which was then followed by fireballs and explosions. He also noticed that the fireballs were scattered at the very beginning, but soon concentrated on the center of the oasis. That was where the watchdogs lived. Different from the vassal clans, the watchdogs occupied the most fertile land in the oasis. However, at the moment, it had become a hell. A fire raged as if the sky was burning. He looked at Iron Axe differently now. By the name of 3 gods, you do not have such strength. Thuram asked with a husky and trembling voice, who did you submit to? Those northerners? A merciful king, Iron Axe replied, he'll bring order and safety to the Irons and people of the Majin clan. This is he subconsciously wanted to say impossible, but when he saw the sea of fire spreading throughout the oasis, the last syllable got caught in his throat and could not be uttered. Unfortunately, not all people are willing to accept such a system. The oasis feeds the Sand Nation, but at the same time imprisons their thoughts. Killing and framing came from fighting for survival. How ironic that the oasis, that should support life, is soaked with blood. As for the watchdogs, the large clans keep them in power and make our clansmen suffer in sand and drought. I have to say, that's a stupid and short-sighted thing to do. If these words were spoken by the northerners, I would not be surprised, but by you, Iron Axe, Thuram shook his head painfully. As a mixed blood grown up in the desert, how can you be so naive? Did you forget that the oasis is limited and can't support the growing population if we don't fight for the territories? Unless Majins are able to overpower Grey Castle, we can't leave the desert. Cooperation and submission will end up in death, as the northerners will never really trust us. The fall of the Blackbone and Sandstone clans is the proof of that. In order to receive rich territory, these 2 clans, which should have the opportunity to live in Iron Sand City, chose to offer their service to Garcia, Queen of Clearwater. What did they get? It was understood that everyone was fed a strange pill and eventually turned into rotten flesh, and the Queen's promise became meaningless. Can we never gain real trust? Iron Axe said with a slight sigh, I used to think so, but the evidence that I have seen tell me that some people are born to break routine. Suddenly, Thuram heard a burst of galloping outside the tavern, which became more and more frequent. He knew that the counterattack team of the watchdogs was assembling. They might lose the courage to fight, but their skills and horsemanship were not lost. As long as any enemies emerged near the oasis, they would go for them like bloodthirsty sandworms. When he was about to remind Iron Axe, he was grabbed by his collar and drawn to the window. Not far away, he saw more burning torches moving toward the desert outside the oasis. Apparently, these watchdogs picked up the attacker's scent. However, both Iron Axe and the dark-haired divine lady were at ease. It seemed that they did not care about this cavalry team. What did I say before? Not everyone is happy to accept the new order. The watchdogs thought they can stop the thunder, the mixed blood whispered in his ear as if he was pronouncing his fate, but whether you accept it or not, the new order will come. Chapter 747, The Sniper. The night was not the perfect hour to fight. The sun and the moon both became invisible during the months of demons. Dismal light spilled across the heaving desert, faintly tracing the curve of sand hills. The area which light failed to penetrate was, in contrast, pitch dark. Given the poor lighting condition, torches became necessities for either attacking or defending. When glitters of fires emerged here and there in the oasis direction, Danny polished his clip, slipped it into the loading port and bolted. Attention, enemies are coming. I saw them. He first mimicked Malt's voice and then replied to himself. In this way, he could pretend that Malt was still fighting beside him as his protector, although Malt was no longer a member of the sniper team. Shortly after Danny had been released from his detention and sent back to the gun battalion, Brian had come to see him and brought him a brand new flintlock. It was exactly the one he was holding right now. Although the new flintlock did not look any different from the bolt gun used by the sniper team, he knew at once that it was a masterpiece after weighing it in the hand. Like longswords that bore a similar looking, some of them were casually forged by blacksmiths just for training purposes. Some of them, however, were splendid weapons, whose blade could bite into flesh as easily as cutting through cheese. The metal part of the barrel gleamed, its surface as smooth as a maid's skin. The joints were all polished like a work of art. The gun was perfectly molded without any prickly feelings. What surprised Danny most was the monocular telescope on the top. The lens was engraved with two straight, crisscrossed fine lines, the intersection of which exactly aligned with the place where a bullet should land. Danny did not understand why the distant target, which had been blurry and tiny earlier, became clear and visible instantly when he looked through the telescope. This meant that the shooting range of the gun had, in a way, been extended. During the testing shooting session, Danny had further verified his theory. He had noticed that the new flintlock was much more accurate than an ordinary bolt gun. When there was no or little wind, he could successfully hit the humanoid target 500 meters away with a headshot at an accuracy of 90%. When he had learned that the weapon had been specially made for him by His Majesty, Danny had almost burst into tears. Despite his misconduct, he was still given high hopes by His Majesty and was even granted the power to freely choose his shooting positions. Danny knew he had nothing to pay back the king for his benevolence but his own life. When Brian had asked him whether he wanted to select a protector, however, Danny had declined the offer immediately. He had his own protector already. It was this gun. And Malt. Like his commander had predicted, more firelights emerged and they covered the desert like fallen stars. Before every battle, the superiors would usually disclose the operation intention and operation target to each team in detail so that soldiers would know when they should expect to see the battle end. For example, the cannon unit would lit bonfires at their rampart and fire every 7 minutes or so to entice enemies to start counterattacks, for the purpose of bleeding off strength from the Watchdog clan and thereby preparing for the general attack at dawn. The lit battlement would attract enemies' attention, whereas controlling the firing rate was to avoid a fierce, swift bombard that tended to directly disperse the roving enemies. Of course, Danny knew the artillery battalion did not have the capability to control their firing rate. Soldiers from the artillery battalion had no idea how many resources were available for them. They were all arrogant, incompetent fighters who probably could not even transport basic equipment to the desert had the witch-named Hummingbird not helped them. Compared with those useless idiots, soldiers from the gun battalion were much more productive. Each soldier in the gun battalion was responsible for carrying both weapons and ammunition. There were a dozen carriages in total, over half of which carried cannon and machine gun shells. One wooden box was only able to house 2 howitzers. If they fought in the same way as they did during the exercise, 2 Longsong cannons would consume all the ammunition they took with them in an hour. If the ammunition was exhausted, they would have nothing to fire. Although Danny admitted that the exercise was magnificent, he always thought tons of gold royals were burned each time they fired. Unfortunately, too ignorant and conceited to understand that all the expenses incurred were actually borne by His Majesty's treasury, the soldiers from the artillery battalion simply viewed such remarkable power as their own. If one day His Majesty stopped financially supporting them, these soldiers would be absolutely nothing compared with the gun battalion. Therefore, the real reason for controlling the firing rate was to reserve some ammunition for future emergencies, rather than avoid the dispersion of enemies. They probably had to wait for another 1 or 2 weeks before new recruits provided supplies and new ammunition to the oasis. When the firelight at the very front was lured into the First Army's ambush, Danny raised his telescope. Norther, ly wind, relatively strong. Your target is about 700 meters away. Thank you. You're welcome. Danny muttered to himself, his hand on the trigger. Considering the accuracy would be greatly affected at night, he did not position himself too far away from the battlement. Instead, he decided to shoot across the field. In this way, he would not lose sight of his enemies even if they were charging forward on their warhorses. Sand Nation was indeed barbarians good at fighting on horseback. The dispersed firelights had gradually formed a straight line by the time they charged. The patterings of hooves drummed the ground in a chorus and gradually grew faster. Meanwhile, those warriors tossed the torches and drew out their swords. As their swords reflected no light, the roaring battlement of the artillery became the most distinctive landmark Danny could see. Just then, numerous flickers suddenly appeared at the two sandhills flanking in the shadow. Tuck, tuck, tuck. The sharp, crisp sound of machine guns mixed with the drumming horse hooves officially marked the commencement of the battle. As there was no field artillery, heavy machine guns became the weapons with the longest shooting range. Bullets streamed out and swept over the charging warriors. The desert instantly began to thunder. Danny could hear people shrieking, cursing and yelling. Shadows seemed to move even faster in the darkness. Danny paid them no mind. His eyes were fixed on the enemy at the very front. 500 meters. I got you. It was not easy to locate his target at a moonless night. He could barely discern the figure of the charging enemy. However, the battle was not an exercise either. He did not have to shoot his head to score. A shot in any parts of the enemy's body would be enough to take him down. This applied to both the mount and the rider. Danny pulled the trigger. The barrel slightly trembled. He was exhilarated by the smoke of gunpowder. Danny did not see where the bullet landed, nor did he notice any spilled blood. The enemy simply died with a quiver and fell off the horse. This is my hunting ground, thought Danny. This is where I should stay. Did you just see that, Malt? Don't be distracted. Your next target is coming. Place the matter in my hand. Chapter 748, A New OSHA Clan. As dusk deepened and the darkness seeped through clouds, both parties found it difficult to continue with the battle. Evidently, once the landing spots of bullets and their targets were indiscernible, the shooting accuracy of the machine gun squad would drop drastically. Although the number of machine guns invested in this operation was not comparable to that in Coldwind Ridge, they could still stop the cavalrymen from charging quite well. When their enemies tossed the torches, there would always be a few dozen people making their way through the barrage fire, howling while dashing toward the artillery and thereby becoming Danny's shooting targets. On the other hand, the enemies could not tell where their real threats lay. They neither saw their companions shatter under fire nor did they know what weapon exactly stood between the two sand hills on either side. Without a torch, the cavalrymen behind did not quite know what had truly happened to their companions at the front. They could only hear the roar of cannons not far away and see the flickering lights on the sides. To them, the thundering cannons were apparently more threatening than unmanned sand hills on the sides. Because of this, the watchdog was not crushed at once but they continuously charged forward like endless foaming tides. For those seasoned clan warriors, they believed constant slashing and charging was the best way to dismantle enemies' wills and lower their morale. Speed represented power. No slave or mercenary could ever defy their ceaseless attack. They believed once the defensive line, no matter how impregnable it was broken through by cavalry, their enemies would soon fall into chaos. This created a perfect opportunity for Danny to prey. It was not long before he shot the 20th enemy down. Meanwhile, Danny also noticed a strange phenomenon. Many times he took aim at an enemy at the very front, only to find that his prey had been taken by someone else. As if someone were competing with him. It was more than that, however. What thrilled Danny was that this sniper hiding in the darkness appeared to be an exquisite hunter. Because all his enemies fell to the same side. If his competitor was facing enemies like him, the target would fall backward when being shot in the torso. If he hit the mount, then the enemy would be thrown off the horse and fell forward. Danny did not really know the mechanism behind this, but his prediction was mostly accurate. The fact that the target fell to one side meant that the shooter was close to one of the sand hills and always shot his enemy in the torso rather than his mount. What does that imply? It indicated that the hunter could not only capture the darting horse rider in the dismal light but could also predict where his target was heading before each firing. As the crisp winds in the desert were always variable and unforeseeable, the fact that the hunter could still maintain such an astonishing accuracy really showed that his shooting was a masterstroke. Is there really such an excellent sniper in the army? Is he a member of the precision shooting squad, or a person like him, a soldier from the gun battalion who was picked out by His Majesty and given a new bolt gun? Danny could barely suppress his excitement. He sped up what he was doing. He did not want to lose to his rival. Especially when Malt was looking up to him. Only one left on your right hand, 250 meters away from the defensive line. He's mine now. The roar of thunders finally died down in the second half of the night, but Thuram did not hear the cheers of returning warriors which he had been anticipating. Although the watchdog was caught unprepared, based on the number of torches, there were nearly 2,000 summoned warriors who participated in the battle. No matter they had lost or won, he should have heard something back from them by now. Nevertheless, after thundering yells and shouts gradually faded away, the night fell deadly silent, as though the 2,000 people had all been engulfed by a giant monster, both flesh and bones. Thuram sent all the clansmen who came to rescue to put out the blazes as Iron Axe had instructed. The fires in the oasis were thus gradually quenched. He was not sure whether he should rejoice or lament. Watchdogs had never ceased their oppression of his clansmen. Thuram had always dreamed that they would, one day, meet some misfortunes, for example, enraging the big clan in the city or being miserably defeated by some challenger who rose abruptly. He would take delight in any woes that rested upon them. But he had not expected that this new challenger was Iron Axe. It seemed that Iron Axe also planned to involve him in this tumult of battle that aimed to select the strongest clan. Perchance he should persuade Iron Axe to first hold the blood-stained place before considering to take the next step. It was true that the golden-eyed divine lady coming with him was powerful, but the one from Raging Flare clan was not so easy to deal with as well. As Raging Flare clan was the biggest clan among all, they could decide how the duel should take place. If they chose to have a one-on-one hand-to-hand combat, Thuram did not think the Iron Axe's divine lady would win. A holy duel was said to be the most open and fairest competition. It was actually, however, more a competition between the two clans. Each of the clan could not only set up traps for the other prior to the duel, but they could also frame their rivals in the ring as well. Skillful warriors was definitely not a guarantee of an eventual victory. For that, the exile of Osha clan had provided the best example. What bewildered him the most, nonetheless, was why the king of Greycastle had a sudden interest in the desert. To northerners, the desert always represented barbarism and primitiveness. Northerners forbade Sand Nation to set foot in their kingdoms. They did not want to meddle in disputes among clans either. Only tradesmen traveled back and forth between the desert and kingdoms, and they usually traded slaves only. Plus, what did Iron Axe mean by order and oasis? It was rumored that only 3 gods' emissary could cultivate an oasis in the desert and stop storms. Another saying was that the southernmost region had originally been a verdant land covered with green grass and trees, interspersed with singing brooks. It was the death of the emissary that made the land parched and wasted like the one today. When 3 gods dispatched their new emissary, the southernmost region would once again become prosperous. However, it was simply a legend shrouded in mystery. Nobody had ever made this happen, otherwise, Sand Nation would not fight for water and food all the year round. While he was waiting in anxiety, dawn finally broke in the east with a dagger of daylight streaking the sky. Then Thuram heard a distant, strange roar of horns. The sound was not as dull and low as the blare of an ox horn, but it was sharper and crisper like a repetitive ticking. Shortly afterward, a peculiar army emerged at the border of the oasis. The soldiers lined up horizontally and approached the blood-stained place with an irresistible force. They then started a bitter battle with the watchdog. It might not be that fierce though, for a group of clan warriors, who dashed forward with swords, all fell to the ground after a series of crack of gunshots. The rest of the warriors dispersed immediately, paying their moaning companions no mind. After the soldiers entered the oasis, they quickly occupied the several watchtowers and encircled the tavern. When that blue-gray-haired, dark-skinned lady came into the room, Thuram knew he had no other choices. Although he had not seen her for 7 or 8 years, he could still perceive some resemblances between her and her mother. Thuram went to his knee in front of Drow Silvermoon, his forehead touching the cold floor. He said in a raucous voice, "I swear to 3 gods that my clansman and I will be at your service. From now on, you'll be the chief of the new Osha clan." Chapter 749, Osha's Present. The moment Rebecca Bloodwhip got out of the bed, he heard the news about the change in the ownership of the small oasis in the northwest. Really? His brows furrowed. Although he had also seen glimmers of fires in the oasis, he had not expected Howling Clan would be obliterated over one night. He tried to think of a newly established clan that possessed such impressive power but could not name any. Rebecca patted his concubine lying next to him to usher her out. After the woman wrapped herself up in a blanket and withdrew, he turned to his men and said, "Fill me in." "Yes, Mr. Chief." According to the people who fled from the oasis, it appeared the fire wasn't caused by the challenger lurking there but was actually a fire from heaven induced by the Father God. Nonsense. Rebecca coughed out a spittle. Those cravens just blame everything on 3 gods when they come across trouble. I'm going to hang all of them above the gate of Iron Sand City. The clansman replied hesitatively, "But I sent someone to the camps at the small oasis this morning. What they found seemed to be consistent with the description. There are many holes as black as pitch in the ground. Corpses and fragments of building materials are everywhere. It doesn't look like a simple arson." Fragments? Yes. Men were torn to pieces as if a huge sandworm or burrow scorpion had plotted on the campground. The clansman was careful to choose his words. Most people who stayed in the camp died miserably, while those who went to seek pleasure outside fought back. Yet they were vanquished even before they saw their rivals. In other words, those fools were ambushed and all ran for life without even approaching their enemies? So what now? Haven't they even figured out which clan took the small oasis? Rebecca started to suspect whether he had been too generous to the watchdog. He had made a great effort in persuading them to work for him, but their performance was indeed disappointing. Could it be possible that they had lived too comfortably for so long that meat and mead had made them more drunken and lecherous than he desired them to be? "My men are investigating and we should soon receive some information from them." The clansman hesitated for a moment and then said, "I heard some refugees say that they've seen many northerners." Northerners? Hearing this, Rebecca began to take this matter seriously. He walked to the window, naked, and looked in the northwestern direction. The fires had been extinguished long before. He could only see tendrils of dark smoke rise into the air at a distance. Although Howling Clan was drawn over to his side and served as his watchdog through the joint effort of both Ironwhip and Bone-Grinding clans, he did not care much about their survival. After Rebecca settled down in Iron Sand City, he came to understand that the Challenger system was actually more a safeguard established by the 6 clans than a qualification test. A holy duel was simply a small fight, whereas battles provoked by challengers for the ownership of the small oasis could be considered as a full-fledged war. It was common for 2 small clans to drown each other in blood, for the oasis was a fat piece of meat that every clan who wished to strengthen their power drooled for, even if they did not plan to set foot in Iron Sand City. No matter which party eventually won, the victory usually cost dear and both parties would need a considerably long time to recover. During the time when challengers were recuperating, big clans could easily convince those small clans to work for them as watchdogs through either bribing or duress. It was particularly easy to persuade those who believed that the compromising was just temporary and that they would sooner or later challenge the big clan to another duel. Practically, in the end, none of them managed to toll the holy bell of Iron Sand City. Because by that time, new challengers would emerge and strike out the old watchdog. In this way, big clans were able to remain in a relatively secure position without being consumed by the war. Now, since Ironwhip had risen to the 4th place on the ranking, it was unlikely that challengers would seek him as their rival even if they planned to start an immediate duel. That was why the change of the ownership of the small oasis had not really alarmed him. But the appearance of northerners had changed the whole story. Queen of Clearwater, for instance, had created quite a big commotion in Iron Sand City. In fact, many people yearned for the evergreen land in the north and were even willing to reduce to slaves or sellswords to live there. The departure of two potential challengers had once left the small oasis unmanned and thus attracted many people who wanted to rule this land to start divine challenges. It was the chaos created by this temporary disorder that made Rebecca's clan the fourth biggest one. What game are they playing this time? Keep an eye on those people and let me know what's exactly happened. Rebecca turned around and instructed his clansmen. Which city are those northerners from? How many of them? What weapon do they carry? What do they want? I want to know all of these. Yes, Mr. Chief. Perhaps it was time for him to discuss the matter with the other big clans. The rule in the southernmost region was that no outsiders should meddle in their affairs. Nonetheless, Rebecca Bloodwhip received a piece of incredible news in the afternoon. What did you say? Osha clan? That's what they say. The banners in the oasis have all been replaced with ones with the sigil of Osha clan. I also saw Princess Osha, who was traded as a slave. She's now a divine lady and is calling on her clansmen. There are a lot of people responding to her call. How can this be possible? Rebecca was not ignorant of the kingdoms in the north. A divine lady was viewed as a representation of evil in Grey Castle. Their social status was even lower than that of a slave girl in Sand Nation, not to mention a divine lady slave. He wondered how she won the support from northerners and returned to the southernmost region to exact her revenge along with her northern followers. Rebecca smelled sheer folly but was also a little rattled by the news. Majans had been forced to confine their activities to the desert up until now, not because they preferred the desert as their dwellings, but because they did not have the capability to confront Grey Castle. If Osha clan supported by northerners planned to wage a war against Iron Sand City, all the clans would come together to fight back. If they, however, only intended to weed him out, would the other clans help Iron Whip? The answer was there. Damn. Rebecca smashed the wine glass to the ground and stomped on it. It instantly broke to pieces. If you want to avenge your father's death through a holy duel, then I'm right here waiting for you. Rebecca said within himself insolently. Northerners may have finer weapons and they might outnumber us, but when it comes to a duel, Irons and people of the Majin clan are the most valiant warriors. I'll let you know the taste of despair. Just at that moment, another clansman entered the hall. Mr. Chief, Osha clan has sent a present to us. What? Rebecca felt his temples throbbing. A present? Yes. It's right in the yard. Take me there. He ground his teeth. It was a huge wooden box, as tall as a grown person, its width half of its height. The box, which was assembled by a few ordinary planks, with an iron nail staked at each corner, looked nothing unusual from the outside. Where's the courier? Rebecca asked. Already gone. How many of them? Well, only one. Only one? He raised his brows and kicked the box. The box rolled over on the ground, producing loud clanks and clinks. Obviously, there was something in it. Yet based on the weight of the box, the stuff seemed to be pretty light, as though the box were hollow. Rebecca wondered if there were torn limbs and flesh or human skins in it. Apart from a bluff, he could not think of anything else. Rebecca commanded coolly, "Take it to Stone Castle. Let's see what game they're playing." Chapter 750, An Unexpected Thunder. After his men opened the wooden box, he saw the present in it. It was a coffin. A finely crafted coffin. The coffin was hemmed with luxurious gold foil, decorated with beautiful lacquer paintings. The pattern on the coffin's lid was a black short whip, which was exactly Iron Whip clan's sigil. Rebecca Bloodwhip stiffened before breaking into a half-sneering smile. That's it? I thought they would give me something scarier than this. He shook his head. I was expecting a head, ears, or a man's skins, which is how Iron Sand City normally handles this kind of matter. A coffin? The southernmost region doesn't need such a frivolous thing. The dead here would all be dumped in the desert, buried in scorching sands, and eventually reduced to skeletons. No matter how prominent and distinguished he once had been, death made them all equal. Only people from the north needed those awkward wooden cases. They seemed to like locking themselves up in this cage of eternity after their deaths. The whore of Osha thought this would frighten me? Rubaka breathed heavily. Perchance she's forgotten how a sand nation usually makes threats after being a slave in Grey Castle for so long. Nonetheless, the humiliation made Rubaka's blood all rush to his head. "Get me the axe," he yelled. Soon a clansman entered with a huge cast-iron axe on his shoulder. The hilt of the axe was nearly of a man's height, its glinty black blade as big as a man's skull. Although Rubaka was the chief of Iron Whip clan, his favorite weapon was this giant, heavy battle axe. It worked perfectly for slaughtering desert beasts and beheading his challengers. Nothing could possibly compete with the absolute power of this axe. Once being hit, the person would die instantly at a single blow even if he was wearing an armor which northerners typically wore. The axe had also tasted the blood of Osha clan, including women's and children's. Rubaka had forgotten to tell Drow Silvermoon that those exiles did not make their trip to Endless Cape because he had taken a detour aforetime and arrived there ahead of them. They had all been slashed in the desert. He did not fear retribution but simply enjoyed killing. A coffin? Get lost. Rubaka coughed out a spittle and howled. He held up the battle axe, aimed at the coffin lid patterned with the iron whip and then gave it a full swing. Crack! A number of sparks flew off the blade as if it had hit something hard like iron or stones. The coffin did not split in half as he had anticipated. From the vibration of the hilt, Rubaka knew the pretty wooden case was actually stuffed with items rather than being empty. But it was too late. Following the sparks, a streak of dazzling light came out of the coffin and soon lit up the entire hall. The lid area expanded immediately as the light spread and flared out. Rubaka, however, did not see any of these. When the light flitted across him, his eyes and tongue were torn to bits by the strength of rapidly expanded airwaves. Subsequently, his head, limbs and inner organs were all torn apart. All the residents in Iron Sand City witnessed an incredible scene when they heard a ground-shaking bang. Flames and smoke escaped from the bottom of the stonewatch of rising sun like raging underground fire. The garden wall was practically wiped out by a giant visible hand. The whole stone castle sprang up abruptly before it collapsed in the heavy smoke. First, the wall sank, followed by the pillars and the roof. As more stones fell off, more smoke erupted from the ground. In the end, a column of smoke rose out of the crumpled stone castle, soared into the clouds, and then finally blended with the overcast sky. A Tower of Babel seemed to be suddenly erected in Iron Sand City. Thuram in Oasis Tavern also witnessed the explosion. He did not understand what the story Iron Axe had told him earlier exactly referred to until a moment ago. The coffin filled with snow powder, the weight reduced by the Divine Lady, the flint closely attached to the lid and the lanyard connected to the ceiling. All of these would trigger a roar of thunders no matter how the coffin was opened. Whether by force or through a regular procedure, the explosion was inevitable. Although he had no knowledge of snow powder or lanyards, he understood what a thunderbolt was. Thuram could imagine how frightful this unexpected thunder was, for the blast, although distant, could be heard somewhere several miles away, and the column of smoke could be even detected at the blood-stained place. If the coffin was truly the cause of such a horrific scene in Iron Sand City, it was very likely that the chief of Iron Whip clan had already died. The only thing that Thuram had failed to predict was that Iron Axe actually took action on Iron Whip clan, the fourth strongest clan, prior to the duel, not to mention the vengeance was inflicted in such a blatant way. He stared at Iron Axe, who remained unperturbed, in astonishment, failing to articulate his sentence. Iron Axe explained nonchalantly, Rubaka Bloodwhip profaned the holy duel back then. He also failed Three Gods' expectation. How can I have a fair fight with a guy who has been disqualified at the Land of Fire? Rubaka and his clan are all cowards. I've never treated them as my rivals since the beginning. But Iron Whip is essentially a big clan. Iron Axe shook his head. That's exactly why I let them die in this way rather than allow them to die with honor in a ring. Plus, Osha clan won't violate three gods' rules. Once our rivals yield, we'll lay down our weapons and exempt them from death. He paused for a second and then said, think about it. Were you the chief of Iron Whip, what would you do when you're informed that Osha clan has come back? Thuram instantly understood what Iron Axe meant. It was true that a person who had once broken the rule was very likely to commit wrongdoings again. A person who disobeyed three gods' rules would cause incessant trouble. Even if he attempted to reverse his defeat 8 years ago through a holy duel, he would probably keep harassing and framing his rivals before and after the fight. It would be better to completely destroy him than constantly having your eyes peeled. But, if Rubaka didn't open the coffin or destroy it, your plan would have failed. Thuram blurted out his last question. The chief of Iron Whip were in nature aggressive and savage. He liked to destroy and slaughter. It's as easy to read his mind as to read a monkey's. Iron Axes curled up his lips into a smile. Plus, the coffin full of snow powder was just the very beginning of my plan, an appetizer, so to speak. Even if Rubaka luckily survived, there was much more awaiting him. Now it seems that three gods won't protect a traitor. Thuram shuddered at these words. He had sworn to three gods when he had pledged fealty to Drow Silvermoon and the new Osha clan. Iron Axe's last sentence was also a warning to him. Now we can crack into the business. The mixed blood patted Thuram on his shoulder, utterly unabashed. The reason I've picked you is that you know everything about Iron Sand City. People in the oasis told me that there's nothing about the desert that you don't know. It's simply because I've been living here for a long time and heard a lot of stories. After witnessing how the watchdog had been defeated overnight and how the explosion had brought upon Iron Whip clan a swift destruction, Thuram showed more respect to Iron Axe, Princess Osha, and Grey Castle that supported them. I'll tell you everything that I know in detail. Iron Axe inclined his head. Very good. If you want to win the holy duel, you have to first thoroughly investigate your rivals. Let's begin with warriors from various clans and their divine ladies. Chapter 751, Devourer, Fran. Currently, the plan for taking the southernmost region is going smoothly. The Iron Whip clan has fallen. Echo entrusted me to send her gratitude to you. It takes some time to prepare for a holy duel, and I expect that the clans in the Iron Sand City will head for the Land of Fire in a week. During the interim, I've hired some clansmen to mark the location of the underground Styx River. I believe we'll soon find a Blackwater River relatively close to the coast. In addition, Your Majesty, how are you going to deal with the Divine Lady of the clan? With my great respect, Iron Axe. Your Majesty, this is the message we received from the southernmost region. The sigil of listening flashed slightly, emitting a red light. Countess Spear paused after reporting, apparently waiting for Roland's reply. Then Nightingale handed another sigil over to Roland. She placed the sigil next to her slim legs on the table where she was seated, and Roland couldn't tell whether she did it on purpose or not. Even though it was not summer, she was still wearing a pair of skinny pants that accentuated her perfect figure. Roland would have to get close to her legs if he wanted to talk into the sigil. For Roland, this was a dilemma. He did not know whether to gaze directly at her legs or glance at them casually. Ahem, well done. I mean, Iron Axe. Your Majesty, are you all right? The Countess inquired. Your voice is husky. Please, keep warm this winter. You aren't as strong as the witches. I'm fine, Roland said as he cleared his throat. Tell Iron Axe to go forward with the plan if the situation is close to what we expected. As for the Divine Lady, he can endeavor to persuade her to come to Neverwinter. But, if she's unwilling to leave the southernmost region, there's no need to push her. Is that all? Yeah. I'll let you know if I have other requirements. I see, then I'll take my leave, Your Majesty. The red light from the sigil went out. Roland raised his head and exhaled gently. Why was he feeling like he had lost something? Nightingale smiled as she put away the sigil before slipping off the table and returning to the lounge chair where she could continue to read the picture story book, The Witch's Story, while she chewed on dried fish. Roland curled his upper lip and started to concentrate on the real business at hand. They had applied all of the sigils of listening in the desert mission. The Countess Spear Passy of Fallen Dragon Ridge is transferring the messages to enable them to reach an instant contact between Neverwinter and the advance troops. Although calling was still somewhat inconvenient, it was much faster than the traditional way of delivering a message that would cost them a dozen days, as well as a carrier pigeon which, though having saved them a lot of time, still took several days. He finally felt he would be able to get an overview of the situation without going out of his territory. Unfortunately, a sigil of listening would only work if a witch provided the power. Which meant, at least 2 sigils and 2 witches are necessary for a conversation to transpire, meaning that it would never replace the current communication tools used by common people. Currently, the laying of the first telephone line in the western region was underway. It would directly connect the castle office to the city hall of the Longsong area. Meanwhile, the second and third lines were also being planned, which, as expected, would connect the city halls in both areas so that any commands could be passed with just one call in the future. Erecting electrical poles was time-consuming and labor-intensive, and furthermore, even the finished poles were vulnerable to the snow and ice. Considering this, Roland decided to do it in a convenient and safe way by setting the cable along the mountains and burying them in the ground by lotus. Once the mountain defenses have been established, inevitably the lines would need to increase in order to connect with his office. However, by that time there would be a 10-hand-operated system in place. Aside from that, Roland was also concerned about the relocation of the ancient Tequila witches. Maggie and Lightning had taken on the role of patrol. They increased their scope of investigation to 30 miles north of the mountains. This way they could signal an early warning in the case of a large-scale demonic beast attack. After all, the relic of deities that were liable to determine the life and death of the Tequila group deserved to be handled with care. He had talked with Pasha many times over the past 2 weeks. Their idea was very simple. They decided to let the worm carrier open up a mountain channel leading to the western region first, and then choose a place where the rock formation was stable and had fewer forked roads, and there they would build a palace. After that, the ancient witches would gradually move carriers, materials, and shells for the gods' punishment army to their new dwelling before transporting the instrument of divine retribution and the relic of gods. So far Fran had the best experience relocating, or perhaps Roland should call her, a devouring worm. Roland was unexpectedly shocked when he saw her squirm her chubby body so she could squeeze before the phantom instrument to express her gratitude to him, mouth gaping. Later, he learned from Pasha that witches who integrated into carriers would no longer be able to be stored in God's punishment warriors. Both, their perceptions and consciousnesses, were consolidated within the new bodies. The advantage was that the carriers could be used in a rush, but once their current bodies were damaged, they wouldn't have any other alternative carriers. Indeed, if the witches did not use this method of bonding, they would not be able to manipulate the body even with a lifetime of practice. How would a person, accustomed to using fingers and limbs, learn to manipulate countless tentacles or a body that had to inch along like a worm? On the contrary, once they had adapted to their peculiar carriers, it was unlikely for them to return to their previous way of life. When Fran was not in use, ancient witches had to put her soul back to the soul container where she would fall asleep forever, for the devouring worm must consume a large amount of food to keep alive. Certainly, it was not a good experience for Fran at all. In a sense, she sacrificed her future for the continuation of the Tequila group, and she had paid a higher price than Pasha and Alethea, who had transformed into the original carriers. At least the latter could always watch the world and feel the changes happening in the outside world. So, her gratitude to Roland was palpable. Another key point that made her feel so grateful was that Roland boasted that there would be ongoing work in Neverwinter waiting for Fran. That meant he would be offering her enough food to keep her energetic. Fortunately, the worm was omnivorous and could accept both cereal and meat. "I want to eat hot and seasoned meat porridge, as well as a whole veal with its skin roasted to be greasy." As Fran said that, her mouth began to water. Although the worm's appearance was a bit ugly, they, like the blob, could sense their external environment in a unique way, which included taste, pain, and temperature. Roland accepted her gratitude in his heart with both laughter and tears. It seemed that no matter the world, the construction industry would always be a huge behemoth that devoured gold. Incidentally, he also asked Pasha what the original and central carrier ate to sustain life. Her answer was mud and high temperatures, which was why they liked to stay in magma. The answer relieved Roland slightly. This meant he wouldn't have to be responsible for supplying food to those who were nearly immortal. Presumably, the blob was more like a plant in the way it gathered energy when compared to the devouring worms. Just as he considered how to plan the mountain defense so the underground military facilities would have an effective connection with the current byroads or even the palace of the ancient witches, there was suddenly the sound of an explosion coming from outside the window. Roland turned and looked out the French window in surprise. He saw black smoke, mixed with some looming flames, rising from the corner of town, where the school would be located. Nightingale. I'll make Sylvie and Phyllis go and take a look. Your Majesty, please don't leave the office. I'll be right back. As Nightingale said this, she entered her mist and disappeared completely. Chapter 752, Detective Group, Another Strike. Lily, have you heard? Mystery Moon rushed into the bedroom and leaned over to put her face close to Lily's. Something happened in the school district. Stand away. You're blocking my light. Lily pushed Mystery Moon's face away and continued to adjust the focal length of her microscope, but she sighed inwardly, thinking that her duplicate test today was going to be checked out again. It said that there was an explosion as well as a big fire. Who do you think was responsible for that? The church or the demons? The church has been defeated by His Majesty, and the demons are thousands of kilometers away from us. Lily glanced up at her impatiently. I suppose it was some idiots who stole the waste of the chemical lab and brought it into the classroom. Similar things happened before. Such as the accident 2 weeks ago, when a researcher had brought the failed gun cotton back to his home and wanted to use it as a kindling for his stove. As a result, it was ignited by his child accidentally and nearly burned the house to the ground. Hearing about this accident, His Majesty blew up, scolding the person responsible in a voice so loud that it echoed throughout the whole castle. After that, the regulations in the chemical lab were strengthened a lot. Lily had seen the new rules from Scroll. It turned from a thin piece of parchment into a book that was as thick as adult's forefinger. But this time there's an explosion. How can you be so indifferent to what happens in Neverwinter? This is our home. Mystery Moon said eloquently. Stop bluffing. You are just too curious to wait for the answer. Lily was a little angry. That's why we should leave it to some more professional people. By the way, what I'm doing is also for the development of Neverwinter. She paused. Yet, all you've been doing is interfering with my experiment and idling about all the time. Oh? Mystery Moon revealed a strange smile. Then what have you achieved so far? Lily suddenly felt short of breath. None, right? You've been staring at that microscope for more than a year and yet you've done nothing helpful for His Majesty, while my electromagnetic power has brought light to His Majesty so that the people could even continue their work at night, Mystery Moon said, having her nose high in the air. Oh, but I, as always, don't dislike you, my old friend. To find out the truth of the problem is also to do His Majesty a favor. Please dislike me, Lily replied spitefully. She still did not know why she was still failing to transform the parent population into some specific types of tiny worms. She had already managed to control the shape of parent worms and make them as accurate as possible to the goal worm she wanted the parent worm to assimilate, but she still failed. The young girl faintly felt there must be something missing between them, but she could not find any particular clues. So, other than healing some cold plagues, she had spent most of her time at the microscope after her ability had evolved. The fact that she could neither promote productivity in Neverwinter like Anna and Soraya nor bring joy to everyone like Evelyn still rankled in her mind. Lily did enjoy observing the complex world that could not be seen with naked eyes, but she also did not want to be a freeloader and contribute nothing to His Majesty, though she would never admit it verbally. Thinking that even the fool, Mystery Moon had surpassed her in achievements, she felt so unpleasant that her heart wrenched. No, I won't. I'm sorry. Just take it as keeping my company, okay? Seeing that pushing Lily did not work out, Mystery Moon immediately changed her strategy. She recovered her beseeching face and held one of Lily's arms, crying. It's not harmful to go out and take a walk. You'll be suffocated staying indoors all day. Lily found it was hard to turn her down when Mystery Moon acted like that. She impatiently drew her arm out of Mystery Moon's holding and looked at her, sighing. I know, but don't make trouble for His Majesty and Sister Nightingale. I promise. How did she not notice that Mystery Moon would become so clingy after they got familiar with each other? If she had known it earlier, she would insist on being paired up as roommates with Leaf or Scroll. So, are we going there now? Lily asked. Hang on for a while. Some sisters also want to find out the truth. I'll go and get all of them. As Mystery Moon said, she rushed out of the room, and after 15 minutes or so, she came back with several witches. Now everyone's here. Let's go. Mystery Moon announced. Lily gaped at the 5 witches behind Mystery Moon. You're going to take so many people there? We also want to be of some help. Amy raised her hand and replied. She, who bonded fast with others, looked even more sprightly than Mystery Moon. If His Majesty permits, Margie, who was a little timid, expressed her idea. And, Vanilla tried to say something. No need to be curious about why she is here, for she must be forced by Mystery Moon, Lily said in her heart. The thing Mystery Moon said is very interesting. I'll go with you. Evelyn gave her reason. Oh, God, even Evelyn is here. Doesn't she have to make wine today? Lily could not help thinking. I suppose I'll just do it in the same way as last time, when we read the test papers in secret. I won't do my power with someone else staring at me. Summer said at last. She looked rather nervous, but more itching than last time. Doomed, these guys are all enchanted by Mystery Moon. But she came to you guys for nothing more than more shoulders to carry the responsibility in case of being blamed by His Majesty. But Lily felt relieved to see Summer here, for she knew that if Nightingale or the Ministry of Justice did not take Summer with them to the scene, it meant that the accident in the school was not grave, which, as she had surmised, was witnessed by many people and did not cause any dire consequences. At last, Lily decided to leave it at that and accompany them to hang around. Margie summoned the magic ark to carry the party to the school district. Through the ark roof, Lily could clearly see things on the ground, which was a fantastic experience for her. Traveling under the ground gave her a feeling of swimming in the seawater, as if when she looked up, she could see the pure blue, rippling sea surface. A police cordon had been pulled up around the school and black uniformed policemen were guarding each crossing. But this symbolic closure meant nothing compared to the magic ark. The party passed through the street and the walls and they entered the school. It was originally a mansion belonging to an aristocrat of Stronghold. After being further expanded by His Majesty, it became the elementary institution of Neverwinter today. However, rather than the houses in the residential district that were made of red brick and cement, most of the rooms here were still made of wood. At this moment, the flame had long been extinguished. Judging from the burned outer wall, they located the place that caught fire on the second floor of the main teaching building, where some wall coverings had fallen off and the ground was scattered with a pile of glass debris that was probably caused by the explosion. The party waited for a moment under the ground, making sure that no one walked in the school and that the whole building was empty before letting Margie control the magic ark to surface from the ground near the school building. Chapter 753, The Truth Reappears. They sneaked into the building and quietly made their way up to the second floor. The smell of burnt wood was still present in the corridor where books and pieces of paper were scattered around the floor, presumably left behind by the students who left in a panic. The group of witches followed the smell and soon found the site of the accident, a classroom located at the end of the corridor. After entering the room, Lily noticed that a corner of the room had been charred black and the entire wall had cracked open. The cracks even reached the floor. However, the fire did not seem to have spread very far. Lily could easily see the marks on the ground that were caused by the changes in the intensity of the flames. The pitch black wood near the source of the fire and the obviously less burnt wood at the outer rims formed a ripple-like pattern on the ground. She knew that this was not a fire that started naturally. But what Lily was worried about the most were the cracks that snaked down the wall. They looked almost as if they were the result of axe swings, and the openings seemed entirely carbonized. Lily could even feel a faint residual warmth when she touched it with her fingers. This must be the place. Mystery Moon walked around the corner and said, "Summer, we'll leave the rest to you." "Okay. But please stop me if someone were to come." Summer walked into the center of the room and summoned her magic power. Thanks to them knowing the exact time of the explosion and the fact that only less than a day had passed since the accident, Summer soon found the time right before the accident. As her magic power gushed out, the damaged walls were covered, and order was restored back to the messy room. Many students appeared in the room, some were taking a nap on their desks while some were happily chatting together. There was no teacher on the teaching podium, meaning that this was probably during a lunch break. Margie and Vanilla, who saw this sight for the first time ever, gasped and could not help exclaiming, but they quickly covered their mouth as were of disturbing Summer. They became quite flustered and almost tripped over as they tried to step back to dodge a student who walked over and passed through them like a ghost. "Don't worry. These are just illusions," Evelyn explained enthusiastically. "Summer can create flashbacks of scenes that have already happened." "What a great ability!" Amy praised with admiration. She wasn't scared at all even though it was also her first time experiencing Summer's flashback creating ability. "Haha, it's actually no big deal." Summer touched her head bashfully. "My ability is nothing compared to Sister Nightingale's." "Nightingale? Do you mean the blonde sister who always follows His Majesty around and barely shows up?" "Yeah, she's the most powerful witch in the Western region, or maybe in the entire kingdom." "Awesome," Amy said with sparkling eyes. "Wait," Mystery Moon suddenly interrupted them. "Look." Lily frowned. "This is bullying?" Evelyn whispered. They saw 5 or 6 10-year-old kids corner 2 girls, arguing fiercely. Each of the 2 girls reacted in completely different ways. One stood in the front, reaching out her hands to block the other kids away from the other girl, while the other was cowering behind her with a frightened look. As the universal primary classes did not set a school age, the oldest student in the bully group looked like to be 15 or 16 years old, taller and stronger than the 2 girls combined. However, the short-haired girl was not intimidated by the other side's numbers or size and just stood on bravely. The witches could conclude from lip reading that they were quarreling about where they came from. Insults such as "go back to the eastern region" and "dogs of the rebel king" were being thrown around. Soon, they started to push at each other. The tallest kid struck first, intending to push the girl down to the ground, but as soon as he grabbed the girl's shoulder with his hands, his knee was kicked by the girl and he fell hard on the ground. The situation in the classroom immediately turned awry. The short-haired girl slipped out of the encirclement as agile as a slippery loach, and aimed another kick towards a fatty, drawing all the attention to herself. At this moment, everyone stopped caring about the currently weeping girl. They all sprang together towards the short-haired girl, who, cunningly, used the other students in the classroom as cover to dodge the attacks. Her small figure helped her to accurately kick the pursuers' knees or ankles, making them hunch over in pain. "What a ferocious little devil!" Mystery Moon was astonished. "Come on. Knock them down." Amy could not help clenching her fist as if she was actually at the scene. "But she doesn't have enough strength," Vanilla said with concern. "And continuing to attack the same places will do her no good, since it won't work a second time." "Oh? How did you know that?" Mystery Moon looked at her in surprise. Sorry, I just used to." "The church taught you that, right?" Evelyn comforted Vanilla. "That's okay. You've passed His Majesty's examination and proved that you're different from the evil pure witches." Lily frowned without a word. She agreed with Vanilla. Although the students who had been kicked down looked flustered, they were able to struggle onto their feet after some time and continued to chase the girl. This time, they were more cautious and guarded their legs so that the girl had less of a chance to hit them. Suddenly, the tallest kid lifted a chair and moved to strike her from behind with it while her attention was distracted by two other kids. "Watch out!" Amy shouted. But a warning shouted at someone who was in the illusion was meaningless, as the illusion only recorded what had already happened. The chair leg hit the girl's head hard and knocked her down. However, at the moment she fell, the girl managed to roll out and away from the attacks from the two other opponents in front of her and squatted on the floor with her hands on her head and her teeth clenched tight. The blood had stained her fingertips. The blood slowly trickled down past her ear and dyed her face red. The tallest kid was a little stunned by the fact that the girl was able to take the strong blow. He hesitated for a while before tossing the chair away and then walked up to her. At that moment, when everyone thought that she was done for, her face suddenly twisted into an anguished look as she opened her mouth to shout out loudly. Although the witches could not hear her voice, they were able to gauge the pain she was in from her look, which she did not even display when her head was hit by the chair. Then a bolt of lightning burst out from her fingertips and were soon followed by a second, a third. The lightning spread along the floor, leaving behind twisted orange-red trails, and as soon as it touched the window, it turned into a sudden burst of light. In a split second, a blinding explosion occurred and a loud bang sounded. The window shattered, and a large hole was blown through the wall. Everyone panicked and ran away, leaving behind the short-haired girl shrouded in lightning. Chapter 754, The Master of Worms. "This is an awakening?" Evelyn said in surprise. "Most likely." Lily nodded. The pain from the first awakening was far more painful than the gash on her head due to the magic power gathered in her body, and it felt like a bite. Many witches would unconsciously exert their power at that moment, which would most likely expose themselves. If it was 2 or 3 years ago, those who awakened openly would almost certainly be doomed. Soon the lightning vanished, but it had ignited the floor and outer wall of the classroom, leaving an orange-red trail of fire along with clouds of smoke. The short-haired girl struggled to return to her stunned friend, shouted, and grabbed her hand to drag her out of the danger area. Lily raised her eyebrow in appreciation. It was known that the first bite had a good chance of not being fatal, but it was a feeling that a witch had never experienced before. Usually, after the bite, a witch would be weak and sweaty. It was very rare for a teenage girl to be able to control her body under such conditions, let alone remember to come back for her companion behind her. Since the fire triggered by the lightning was very small, the flames did not spread very fast. By the time the second half of the classroom was enveloped in flames, all the people had escaped from the teaching building. Seeing the truth of what had happened, Summer ended the flashbacks. "Good, we have a new sister." Lily raised the corner of her lip. She could foresee that, regardless of her ability, the girl would be a rather good witch, at least, with respect to her bravery and her will. This girl gave Lily a feeling that not every witch would be as bad as Mystery Moon. She deliberately turned to glance at Mystery Moon who, against her expectations, stood there shocked, without giving any visual clue that she was paying attention to what was being said. "Ugh. What's wrong with this fool again? We have to tell Sister Wendy immediately," Amy suggested. "There's a new witch in Neverwinter." Agreed. Evelyn nodded. "Let's go to the castle now." Wendy probably already knew, thought Lily and shrugged, but she did not speak her thoughts out loud. She had intended to return her bedroom to continue her observation of the tiny worms after the incident, and the castle was on the way back. Mystery Moon? When they were about to walk toward the castle, they noticed that Mystery Moon was still riveted to the floor. I'm coming." She shook her head clear of any distractions and went to keep pace with the others. "Are you all right?" Evelyn asked as she touched Mystery Moon's head. "I'm fine," Mystery Moon replied under her breath, looking quite different from the excited version of her when she first arrived. Such an odd girl. Lily could not help thinking. Lily twitched her mouth and then took Mystery Moon's hand through which she injected a magic parent worm into her body. Although the fool should not be infected with a cold, what if she was? They traveled back to the witch building via the magic ark and immediately reported to an angry Wendy, who, as they had expected, scolded them. There was no need for you girls to investigate the matter. Sylvie noticed the magic reaction in school when she was in the castle and has since learned everything after questioning the people there. Wendy knocked every witch's forehead with her hand. Sneaking through the police perimeter and entering a potentially dangerous place, you are spending too much time with Lightning. Do you want to be confined to the classroom and take 3 practice tests like her? Everyone's faces changed as they heard Wendy's words. They shook their heads immediately. Ah, I almost forgot. Evelyn suddenly clapped her hands and said, I have to check the tavern stock before dinner. I also have a problem to consult Isabella about. Margie bowed deeply. I'll leave first. Me too. Vanilla hurriedly followed her out. Eh? Amy stayed for a while, still failing to come up with a reasonable excuse and ended up being dragged out of the office by Summer. Lily sighed at the sight. Do you really think you could escape from punishment if Wendy really intended to penalize you? It's not even a bad thing to spend a night finishing 3 practice tests to review what we have learned. After Lily pushed Mystery Moon's head forward so they could apologize with a bow, they left for their bedroom. Now can you tell me what happened? After the door of their bedroom was closed, Lily rolled her eyes at her roommate who looked very sad. Are you acting like that to gain my sympathy? Lily, Mystery Moon sniffed. The new witch can let out electricity. What is the issue then? Electricity is magnetism and magnetism is electricity. In other words, I can be her and she can be me, she said worriedly. What if her power is stronger than mine and His Majesty no longer needs me? Pfft, Lily almost choked on her saliva. Why would you say that? Even if both of you have the same ability, His Majesty will never deliberately kick someone to the side to being used. But he'll always compare. But you are never the same. As Lily said that, she was suddenly stunned. Never the same? The words resounded in her mind. Then she asked, wait, what did you say before? Electricity is magnetism? After that. She can be me. That's it. Lily felt a light bulb turn on in her head as a new idea emerged in her mind. No longer caring about Mystery Moon, she ran to the desk, picked up a drop of water from a cup, laid it under the microscope, and started to adjust the focal length intently. What do you mean by that? Mystery Moon protested. Hey, can't you comfort me for a little longer? Leave me alone. Lily waved. If you don't want to be overlooked, start to study more attentively from now on. By doing so, you may have some hope. There was always a difference when comparing things. She had drawn and compared many pictures for her target worms and created parent worms based on the pictures and compared the results. However, no matter how hard she had tried, she had still failed to create a replica of the target worm. This was because she could never draw out every detail of a target worm based on her observation. Once the microscope was adjusted or a target worm moved, she would get a very different picture. A parent worm created by her based on this kind of observation would never be exactly the same as the original. If she wanted to turn a parent worm into a particular worm, the two should first become the same thing. Lily soon set a goal. A transparent worm looked like a rotten grape. They were very common in water and were often chosen as her test subjects. She gently touched the slide and summoned a magic parent worm that was invisible to the naked eye. She first restrained the parent worm's urge to assimilate the worms around it and then slowly moved its tentacles toward the transparent worm. When the two worms stuck together, the parent worm started penetrating into the target worm until its whole body turned a light purple. Now the parent worm was the target worm and the target worm was the parent worm. When she let go of the restriction on the parent worm's assimilation power, for the first time, she saw the parent worm did not return to its original state as it usually did. Instead, it swam in the form of the transparent worm. As time went on, the worms around it were all transformed into transparent worms as well, and soon enough, the transformation spread throughout the entire droplet. 7 or 8 minutes later, she could no longer find any other tiny worms except the transparent worms. Chapter 755, Crisis Management. Barav and Scroll walked into Roland's office together. "Your Majesty, here's the statistic analysis of the accident." "Oh? So what exactly happened?" Roland asked with concern. "Fortunately, no one was killed in the accident. 6 students were injured. 3 got fractures as they were escaping from the classroom. 2 lost their hearing, which should be caused by the deafening explosions, and 1 got severely burnt. All of them were cured by Miss Nana." Roland felt relieved after hearing City Hall Director's report. Scroll added, "It happened during a lunch break." Hearing the loud noise, the teachers in the office immediately organized the students to evacuate. Ferlin Eltek told them that it was the First Army on maneuver and that the soldiers were simulating a counterattack against enemies attacking the school. He ordered the students to calm down and act in coordination. By doing so, he successfully controlled the panicked students except those in Class 6. That class witnessed the awakening of the witch, and all the injured students mentioned by Barav were in this class. Roland praised Ferlin at once. "He's indeed morning light." To take advantage of the prestigious First Army as a way to restore the order and calm down the students. What he did significantly reduced the impact of the accident. As long as we take some proper remedial measures afterward, most people won't think that the awakening of a witch may be a dangerous thing. The newly awakened witch had done her best to control her power. This was to some extent prevented this accident from turning into a disaster. The loud bang had been caused by electric current striking through the air, which formed an electric arc with the metal bolt on the window. Similar to a thunder, it was something very loud but not extremely destructive. Agatha had quickly come to the school after the accident. Naturally adept at fighting fires, she had frozen the source of the fire in several minutes to save the main teaching building. Despite that, Roland still considered replacing the old teaching buildings with modernized concrete in case similar accidents happened again. Barav asked, "Your Majesty, what remedial measures are we going to take?" Roland tapped on his desk and asked, "Do you have any ideas?" The City Hall chief thought for a moment and answered, "We have to notice 2 points in this accident. The first one is the reason behind the students' fight. Based on our investigation, this conflict was caused by a quarrel between some kids from the Southern Territory and Eastern Region. They were fighting about whether the Eastern Region was the home of the rebel king, as Valencia was Timothy's domain. This area hasn't surrendered to you, so, probably not willing to talk too much about the infighting of the royal family." Barav paused for a moment before he finished his sentence and then continued. "The kids could never know these kinds of things unless their parents were talking about them at home. To avoid such disputes, we'd better punish the parents of those kids and ban any discussion about Timothy." "Well, you can go ahead with that. My second point is how to prevent a witch's awakening from causing harm to the public. My suggestion is that no matter what you decide to do about this accident in the end, we should make it a rule in law to avoid disputes." Without any comment, Roland gave Barav a meaningful glance, excited about his improvement. These 2 years working as the chief of City Hall had indeed opened his eyes and helped him understand things in new ways. Now, he was not the assistant of the treasurer anymore and was able to dig out the root cause of a fight among students. However, Roland also noticed some limitations in Barav's thoughts. Times were different now, as a strong central power had started to replace the feudal aristocratic order. With greatly increased power, City Hall had to shoulder greater responsibilities. Writing a decision of the king into the law could not guarantee that everyone would uphold it. Sometimes, when it went against most of the people, making it a law would even sow the seeds of rebellion. This hidden crisis would break out sooner or later and become a thorny problem. "What do you think?" Roland looked at Scroll. "Your Majesty, I've some different views. Now that most subjects of Neverwinter are from different places across Grey Castle, we're going to see various beliefs among them. If we ban all the disputes they have, the law will become too complex, bogging down City Hall management. I suggest we guide them to mediate and to know right from wrong. This approach may work better than the law in preventing this kind of disputes. Scroll paused to think for a moment and continued, regarding the second point mentioned by Berev, I think you should ask Miss Agatha for suggestions, as Tequila must have rich experience in coping with these kinds of accidents caused by the awakening of witches. Roland picked up his teacup and slowly took a sip. He agreed with Scroll about guiding public opinion. As compared to a one-size-fits-all solution, namely the law, offering proper guidance to the people was a better choice and at the same time a very feasible plan. Unlike feuds fueled by nationalism in the world he had lived before, the disputes happening between these different regions were much simpler. Having never been infected by any form of nationalist sentiment, the human beings in this world would easily accept the propaganda that all the people in Grey Castle and in the other kingdoms were the same. Thinking about this, he decided to deal with the students involved in the fight leniently. He also planned to write this view into teaching materials to tell all his subjects that all of us were the same kind, honest people, except for a small number of rebels with ulterior motives, and that innocent people should never be blamed for those rebels' sins. For him, the really difficult part was how to harmonize the witches' relationships with the common people. He wanted the witches to be well accepted and thought of as part of the people instead of being an isolated group. However, the witches were very different from common people, making it an arduous task which might last throughout the human history in this world. He could not think of a perfect solution to the problem at this moment. He decided to take it slow and follow Scroll's suggestion to learn from Tequila first. Fortunately, this accident hadn't turned into a disaster, so he could still easily deliver his policy of integrating witches with the people. With these thoughts in mind, Roland said, let's handle this dispute as an ordinary fight among students. The one who beat the girl and injured the witch with a chair must be verbally criticized and pay their medical expenses. The witch union will pay the medical expenses for the other wounded students in Class 6. City Hall needs to mend the teaching building as soon as possible to open the school again. Yes, Your Majesty. Berev and Scroll replied simultaneously. As for the remedial measures, let's do what Scroll suggested. Guide the people's opinions. I'll draft a plan for you later. He heaved a long sigh of relief. By the way, that witch. Her name is Sharon, Your Majesty. Do you want to meet her? Scroll asked. No, let her have a good rest to recover for a few days. You can ask Wendy to see her and tell her the basic situation of the witch union. I see. After Berev and Scroll left the office, Roland called Agatha and Phyllis next. Before taking a seat, Agatha said solemnly, Your Majesty, I've got something to tell you. The awakenings of witches in Neverwinter doesn't seem quite right. Chapter 756, Magic Power Tide. Roland was startled. Is there anything wrong? After a little hesitation, Phyllis said, Here's the thing. We heard that within the last year, only one witch awakened here. Is it true? Roland took out a name list that was made by Wendy from his drawer. He could easily look up each witch's day of awakening and day of adulthood on it. It was prepared in the case that he would forget these important dates. After checking the list, he nodded and said, Yes, 2 witches joined the witch union last year during months of demons. One is Paper, who awakened 3 years ago, the other one is Summer, who awakened last year on her day of adulthood. Phyllis knitted her eyebrows, saying, That's not right, Your Majesty. How many people did Neverwinter have in the last year? 20,000 or 30,000? Roland could not help but feel proud when talking about the population growth. Probably 50,000, and this year there are already over 100,000 people in the city. A city of over 100,000 people resembles Arietta in the early days. When we retreated from the fertile plains, Tequila only had 250,000 people. However, do you know how many witches awakened every year in those 2 cities? Phyllis's voice turned deep. Even when the magic power tide touched the bottom, Arietta had at least 10 newly awakened witches every year. Tequila's number tripled that. Magic power tide touched the bottom? Agatha explained, Yes. The magic power prevailing in this world has ups and downs like tides. 2 years after the arrival of the bloody moon is the peak of magic power. During this period of time, new witches will awaken every day. After the peak, the power will decline around the world. With the magic power at low tide, this period between two arrivals of the bloody moon will only see witches awaken during the months of demons. Roland had heard it from Agatha that more awakenings of the witches would happen when the magic power was strong. However, he had only known that the power would have a peak every year during the months of demons and never thought that it had several hundred-year cyclical fluctuations. He was surprised, saying, "But the third battle of divine will is close." Phyllis looked worried, saying, "This is what we're worried about." Fearful beast of hell appeared, which means the bloody moon is about to come. During this period of time, the magic power should get stronger than usual, and it will, according to Celine's test results. Given this, lots of witches should awaken now. If they are not in the city, they should awaken in nearby towns and villages. Back in the Tequila Age, our domains around the Holy City offered more witches than the city did. Based on the Union's experiences, a city with a growing population should see a significant increase in the number of newly awakened witches. But why don't we see many new witches appearing in Neverwinter? Agatha said slowly, "At first I guessed it might be because the city deliberately avoided recruiting girls or because the newly awakened witches were too afraid of the church to expose themselves and join Neverwinter. However, now it seems that I was clearly wrong. We've discussed with Pasha and come to a conclusion. We think that some unknown factor may be affecting the awakenings of new witches, and its influence is gradually expanding." After a long thoughtful pause, Roland asked, "If that's the case, will you be able to find out the factor?" Agatha and Phyllis looked at each other and then shook their heads. He threw up his hands, saying, "As you don't know what to do about it now, let's assume that the deities are just having a rest. No matter how many witches awaken every year, we still have to drive the demons out of the land of dawn." With that being said, he had to admit that if he had not established the basis of industrialization, which significantly reduced his needs for the God's punishment army or the chosen one, this news would have been terrible for him. Surprised by Roland's reaction, Phyllis remained speechless for quite a long while before she said, "You're right. We've got to defeat the demons no matter what." "That's it." He smiled. By the way, I called you here because I want to ask you something about the Union. Recently, I'm a little worried about the harmful accidents caused by the awakenings of new witches. How did you handle these kind of things back in Tequila?" "Your Majesty, it's simple. At that time, all the people knew the half-quarter of an hour rule. Phyllis was now speaking to Roland with a greater respect. "Half-quarter of an hour rule?" She further explained, "Yes, Your Majesty. There's a warning before each awakening. The free magic power will need about half a quarter to cohere inside a new witch's body. During this period of time, she will initially feel a slight sting and a mild burning sensation in the stomach. After that, the pain will keep on getting worse until she feels the first magic bite. Usually, stronger girls will be able to endure greater pains, but even they will still feel a prick in the beginning." She paused for a moment and continued, "According to the half-quarter of an hour rule, when a new witch loudly announced that she was about to awaken, all the people nearby had to leave as soon as possible. If they stayed in the place and thus got hurt or killed, the Union wouldn't pay them any compensation. We only paid for the damages she caused to a place." Hearing this, Roland thought to himself, "This is indeed a nice solution, but it only works when everyone is very familiar with witches, especially young girls. They must learn when to announce their awakening instead of taking the sign as a common stomach ache." He asked, "What if the new witch caused harm to the other witches? If she didn't make the announcement, she would get fined or a caning punishment based on the damage she caused. If she did, the Union would take full responsibility for her." However, things like this were rare, since only a few of us were combat witches and a newly awakened combat which could seldom cause harm to anyone. This is to say, back in the Tequila Age, if some common people failed to escape from the scene where a witch awakened, the Union would only say it was their bad luck. It's understandable as witches were superior to the common people at that time, but not in this age, Roland thought, and decided he simply could not copy this rule. Meanwhile, he also noticed the good part about this half-quarter of an hour rule. At least, it had raised the public awareness of the dangers that might be caused by the awakenings of witches and made the people understand that witches were human beings and every girl might have a chance to become a witch. This rule reminded him of traffic signals in the world where he had lived before. Everybody knew red for stop, green for go, and had to follow this rule to prevent damage. As now it was not the tequila age anymore, he decided that he could not let the witches get away with all the damage they caused during awakening. He thought, I'd better revise this rule, treating the witches and the common people as equals. Let City Hall take care of the damages caused by a new witch who makes the announcement before her awakening. As for the witches who don't make announcements and cause severe damage, they must be put on trials for negligently injuring others. Or, I can formulate a special law to regulate the witches' behavior, which may be able to ease the tension between the witches and the common people. Chapter 757, Sharon. Wendy walked into the hospital with a dinner box in hand, and there she saw Nana's father Tigui Pine talking with a man and a woman. They bowed and then bent their knees, acting as if they were going to get down on their knees, but Viscount Tigui stopped them at once. This went on for quite a long while and then they bowed to him and left reluctantly. When they got out of the hospital, Wendy came to him and asked curiously, "Who are they?" Tigui shrugged and said, "Who else could they be? They're the parents of the new witch. They were worried about leaving her alone in the hospital and were asking whether they could take her home. After I told them it was the king who wanted her to stay here, they immediately changed their attitude and expressed gratitude to His Majesty." Wendy sensed a little disappointment and pride in his last sentence. Wendy couldn't stop herself from laughing. "You think every parent is like you, who dare to break into the Lord's castle for his daughter." She knew why he felt disappointed. He believed that parents should never hand their kids over to anyone else, even if a king asked. When Nana had awakened, he had gone directly to Roland's castle without a letter of introduction. Fortunately, the kind and merciful Prince Roland had never intended to do any harm to her, so this incident had ended up becoming a moving story. If he had intruded into the castle of Duke Ryan or any other great noble in the western region to save Nana, he would have never been able to get off so easily. Although that story had happened before Wendy had come to Border Town, she had heard it from Nightingale repeatedly. That was why she naturally understood where Tigui's pride came from. At least, they're way better than Summer's parents, Wendy sighed. Summer's parents had hurriedly sent her to the castle to get 1 gold royal when she awakened to be a witch. They had treated her like a slave they had sold to the king and the witch union and warned her not to refuse any of their requests. If it hadn't been for the money they would have got, they probably would not let her return home. Disappointed by her family, Summer did not return home as often as before once she got used to living with all the sisters in the witch building. As a witch, she could be considered as lucky. However, as a daughter, she had been abandoned by her parents. Tigui nodded and agreed with Wendy. Indeed, they are. One of them works in the furnace area and the other is a handyman in the construction team. They had no idea what happened to her until they finished their jobs, but as soon as they heard the news, they hurried here without even having dinner. I can tell from their faces, they do care about the girl. Wendy smiled and said, "It looks like I was right to bring this dinner box with me. Could you take me to Sharon?" Tigui touched his beard and said, "Of course, please follow me." After the restructure and extension, this hospital now had an inpatient department, but only a few patients would stay here, as Nana and Lily could cure most of the patients in Neverwinter in a short time. They usually just needed to stay in the hall of the hospital for a while to fully recover. Considering that the influence of the church might still exist, Roland had asked the hospital to let Sharon stay. He was not sure whether all the people who had immigrated from the other districts of Grey Castle could accept the witches as one of them. By keeping her in the hospital, at least, he could ensure that she would not become homeless or get hurt by her family. Tigui and Wendy came to the recovery ward. He gently pushed the door open and waved to Nana by the bed. "It's time dinner. You can talk to your friend later." "She's not going to have dinner with us?" Nana asked, surprised. She then saw Wendy and said, "Sister Wendy. You also came." Wendy smiled and patted the dinner box in her hand, saying, "I brought her dinner." Nana said, "Oh, I see. You guys talk first. I'll come back later." She said goodbye to Sharon and left the ward with her father. Wendy walked to the bed and put the dinner box on the bedside cupboard. She turned around and met Sharon's eyes. The new witch was looking at her, her face curious. Wendy asked, "How do you feel about becoming a witch?" The girl had a childish face and short rosy hair. It was a rare hair color in Grey Castle and reminded her of a rosebud. Wendy knew for sure that she would become more beautiful after her awakening. She could already imagine how extraordinary she would look once she would enter adulthood. Sharon replied, "I felt that something got into my body. Miss Nana told me that was the magic power." She pursed her lips and continued, "Are you a witch, too? Does it always hurt the first time?" Though her second question could cause some ambiguity, she knew exactly what she was talking about. "Yes, I'm a witch. You can call me Wendy. As for your second question, not really. It's not that important anyway. As long as you learn how to use the magic power, it'll become part of you, like your arms and legs." With these words, she opened the iron dinner box and put the steaming food on the bedside cupboard. Sharon swallowed twice to prevent herself from drooling, but she could not stop her stomach from growling. She blushed with embarrassment at once. "Are you hungry?" Wendy smiled and immediately placed a bird beak mushroom soup in front of the little girl. Some scallions were floating in the light yellow soup. The oil on the surface was shimmering in the firelight. Compared to a light vegetable soup, the smell of the meat made the soup much more tempting. Wendy had learned this trick of using nice food to reassure people from Roland who liked to hold a banquet to welcome new witches. Sharon nodded vigorously. Wendy said softly, "Drink some soup to warm your stomach first before you eat other food." Soon the little girl started to gobble down her dinner, making even Wendy feel hungry, too. She asked, "Where's your friend? Did she go home?" Sharon said while devouring her food, "I don't know, probably yes." Wendy was surprised. "Didn't she come to see you?" "No," Sharon shook her head. "She probably did not trust me completely. After all, I also came from the Southern Territory like those students who bullied her." Wendy was startled. "What? You're from the Southern Territory?" "Yeah." The little girl stuffed a piece of bird beak mushroom into her mouth. "Mapleflower Town, a small town near Eagle City, but now it's uninhabitable." Wendy exclaimed, "I thought you're from the East just like her." "I thought that was why you helped her." "I shouldn't help her as we're from different regions?" Sharon blinked her eyes and said seriously, "The disputes among the nobles obviously have nothing to do with her. Those guys just wanted to find some excuse to bully her. No matter where we came from, wrong is wrong. If I didn't stand out to stop them, nobody would correct such a mistake." She remained speechless for a while, lost in her thoughts. "Your Majesty, you were worried about nothing. This girl doesn't need me to comfort her. I can tell from the expression in her eyes, she's absolutely certain about her decision." Chapter 758, Inherited Belief. "Did you learn this from your parents?" Sharon nodded and said, "Yes, mainly from my father. He often told me that many things in the world were wrong because no one corrected them, and then people would get used to these wrong ideas as time went by. He taught me that many common things might be wrong and that if none of us stood out to fix them, we would repeat these mistakes and thus make the world worse and worse." Wendy said slowly, "But unfortunately nobody would be willing to stand out unless the bad things happened to himself. Just like before, when the church persecuted the witches, most people only cared about the gold royals they could get from the church instead of thinking whether those hanged kids were really evil." Sharon said, "What they did is wrong. They thought those mistakes would do no harm to themselves, so they could repeat them for their personal interests. However, the mistakes will make the world worse, and then it'll become everyone's problem." Surprised by Sharon, Wendy could not help but feel curious about her parents. She pretended to ask casually about them but instead got an unexpected answer. "They're not my real parents," Sharon said. "They're not?" As the girl began to talk about her parents, she started eating slower. "Well, my parents are dead. The war destroyed Eagle City and the Order of the Southern Territory. After that, homeless refugees and beggars were everywhere, and so were robbers. My parents were members of the patrol team, fighting against them. One day, they just didn't return home. In the end, the lord of the town fled. Seeing that, all the townspeople left, too. Nowadays, Mapleflower Town had already become a deserted domain. In other words, this tragedy was caused by the royal decree on the selection of crown prince. Just as her father said, this absurd decree, which seemed to be irrelevant to the people, turned out to be a disaster for them. Wendy gently touched Sharon's head to comfort her, saying, "I'm sorry for bringing up these things." The little girl quickly stopped mourning her parents' death. She dispelled her sadness and recovered, saying, "That's all right. They were already prepared to sacrifice themselves. My father often said that since mistakes would cost us greatly in the end, we'd better pay the price to correct those mistakes in the first place, which was an honor actually." Wendy was moved, thinking, honor. Most patrol team members wouldn't give a damn. They behave like rats, placing personal benefits above those of the public. When order and discipline stand in the way of personal interests, they won't hesitate to break them. Given that, Sharon's real parents were really rare and respectable. After a long silence, she said, "Those people who came to see you." Sharon licked her fingers and said, "They're my father's friends. He helped them before. In the past 2 years, I've lived with him, Uncle Cormac, and his wife. They don't have any kid and treat me like their own daughter." Wendy fell silent, thinking, they did do their best to take care of Sharon. That's quite a rare thing for an ordinary family. After that, she did not say anything and just looked at Sharon eating her dinner. The little girl finished her last deep-fried pork cutlet and heaved a long sigh of relief, looking satisfied. "Thank you. This is the best dinner I've ever had." Now that Neverwinter was able to provide plenty of food for the people, no one in the city was worried about being hungry anymore. However, meat was still a rare thing on tables of ordinary families. People of which would feel greatly satisfied to simply have a piece of dried meat in their oatmeal. As for this kind of deep-fried half-lean meat, only highly paid people such as the alchemists and officials in City Hall could afford them. Wendy took out a handkerchief to wipe Sharon's oily mouth and said, "After you join the Witch Union, you can eat dinner like this every day." Sharon's eyes shined and asked, "Really? I'll be able to have meat every day?" Wendy put the dishes back into the dinner box and said, "Of course, and you'll have fresh boar meat instead of the cured meat in the convenience market. His Majesty prefers the streaky pork, but not every boar has that quality. Only the extra fat ones will have this kind of pork. If it's steamed, it'll be soft and tender and melt in your mouth. If it's fried, it'll be crisp and smell really good. By the way, he likes to call this kind of pork 5-flower meat, but I really don't get why it's related to some flour." Thanks to Lightning and Maggie, who liked to hunt and toast their prey in the wild whenever they were on patrol, the Witch Union members could enjoy the tasty food every day. In the past, they could only bring back few toasted rabbits and bird eggs, but since Maggie had the ability to evolve into a winged devil beast, the number of their prey had increased drastically. They could bring back boars and snow wolves now, and if Roland required them to bring meat back, they could fill the castle's basement with their prey within a day. Wendy once had wondered why His Majesty had called the Misty Forest a great treasure trove which had not been fully utilized yet, but now seeing the tasty food on the table every day, she believed what he had said. "How come you know this sort of thing?" "Could it be?" Sharon asked, surprised, with her hand covering her mouth. Wendy could not help but smile. "Yes, that's right. As long as His Majesty isn't very busy, he will always eat with the witches." "What about the one gold royal?" "That's also true." The little girl pointed to herself. "May I join the Witch Union?" Wendy chuckled. "Of course, you can. The Union will guide you to use and improve your ability and at the same protect and take care of you. We accept all the witches who are willing to work for His Majesty and Neverwinter as our sisters. After joining it, do I have to live in the castle?" "It's up to you." If you want to spend more time with your family, you can still live at home, Wendy explained. She could tell that Sharon had already taken Uncle Cormac and his wife as her family, though they were not related by blood. What about the school? The union offers special courses for the witches. As we're able to learn faster and need to learn more, the universal education doesn't suit us. Wendy paused to think for a moment. In your case, you'll be required to practice your ability in the beginning, as you're still very young. As for the courses for witches, they're usually arranged in the evening. If you can manage to go to school at the same time, you'll be able to finish your universal education and get a diploma. Without any hesitation, Sharon nodded vigorously, saying, I want to join the witch union. I want to become someone like Miss Nana. Even if she hadn't said it aloud, Wendy could still see the answer from her eyes' expression. Just like in her questioning before, the girl was certain about every decision she made. Wendy thought, it seems that I can move up the date of her ability test and the contract signing. Chapter 759, Second Transformation. The next day afternoon, Roland received Sharon's ability report. That's fast. He raised his eyebrows as Wendy handed him the test sheets. Has she accepted that she's now a witch? Yes, and in a calmer way than we'd expected. Wendy laughed as she recounted the meeting from the previous night. I've to say, her parents have brought up a fine child. Roland was rather impressed himself. In this era, someone who could make such far-sighted considerations would already be considered a pioneer. Perhaps, this was how history had always been driven. As a belief was passed down the generations, more and more people were imbued with the same aspiration, and when the numbers reached a certain level, the world would undergo an extraordinary change. As they say, a little spark can kindle a great fire. Perhaps, mankind had reached civilization by taking small steps like this. He examined the details of the test, particularly the evaluation of magic power. As a witch who was awakened at the young age of 15, Sharon's magic cyclone ability was of an above-average standard. It was even noted in the report that this was comparable to adult witches in Tequila. Evidently, Phyllis was present during the test. Among the witches in Neverwinter City, she was often the one who was most receptive to the arrival of new witches. Sharon's ability was to generate electric currents. However, Wendy's write-up on this section was rather vague, perhaps because the study of electricity was one of the more difficult topics within elementary physics. When she increased the intensity of her electric currents, the consumption of magic power would rapidly increase, but her electric currents would become strong enough to break wooden planks and melt iron. At a weaker intensity, she would need to touch the object to produce an effect, such as lighting a light bulb, albeit she was prone to burning the filament. As Sharon had only recently awakened, her control of magic power was very unstable. Wendy's conclusion was that she was most suited to be a combat witch, while also having potential to assist in production. Roland had no plans to do a retest. After all, he had no tools to measure electrical voltage and current, and therefore would not be able to obtain exact values. Furthermore, Sharon would have to expend a lot of magic power to release high-voltage electric current. Her ability to maintain the transmission of electricity was obviously not as good as Mystery Moon's Dawn Eye, let alone an electromagnetic gun. But most importantly, all effects that were produced by magic power, whether it be Anna's black fire or Sharon's electric current, did not necessarily comply with the related theories. Only when the abilities were transformed for a second time into other effects would they correspond with the knowledge he had. In sum, it was already clear that Sharon's ability had a lot of potential. Roland was certainly eager to know what kind of progress could be made when the essence of electric current was fully understood, as well as to see how much Sharon's magic power would improve by as she grew older. But for now, it was best to follow Wendy's recommendation to allow Sharon to practice on her own and focus on her studies, in which she had some catching up to do. Roland thought about her strong sense of justice, and suddenly had an idea to admit her into the judiciary one day. An electricity-generating young lady patrolling the streets and arresting criminals, this seems to be exceptionally familiar. Without revealing his thoughts aloud, he nodded at Wendy and said, "Will do as you've recommended, many thanks." "My honor, your majesty," Wendy bowed. When Roland returned to his office after dinner, he discovered that Lily and Mystery Moon had joined Nightingale in the room. The trio were gathered around the desk and seemed to be in an argument. "Take a look at this." Nightingale gestured towards Roland. "My goodness, they look so real." "What is it?" Roland walked up to the desk curiously, and only then noticed the 2 pots of bird beak mushrooms placed on the table. What's with these mushrooms?" One pot of mushrooms seemed rather shriveled like kitchen stock, while the other was much fresher and juicier. He pinched a mushroom stalk from the latter, causing its sap to gush out immediately. "This is quite fresh. Were these recently picked by lightning?" Nightingale and Mystery Moon turned to look at Lily in unison. Lily shrugged her shoulders. "I used my magic power to create them." "Oh, magic power?" Roland casually replied before he startled violently. "Wait, what? You used magic power to create them?" "Your Highness, her cohering ability has changed somewhat," Nightingale explained. "If, let's say, it was only a purple worm after the first evolution, it has now added patterns on its back. Her magic power capacity has also increased." After a brief pause, she continued, "In other words, Lily's ability has evolved a second time." "But still, they're worms." Mystery Moon chimed in. Of course, this provoked a look of disgust from Lily. "Is this so?" Roland joyfully picked up another mushroom and examined it carefully. He quickly understood how she had created them. "You're now able to make a magical swarm of worms turn into a particular form that you want?" "Yes. But they must at least be visible through a microscope, and a suitable target must be found, before the next step of assimilation can be transacted." Lily nodded. Although she acted very calm, the glimmer in her eyes gave away her inner delight. "Because the worms produced by bird beak mushrooms are relatively easier to observe, I chose them for this experiment." She was most likely referring to fungal spore, which was also the building block of fungi. Roland started to feel excited. Perhaps, to Lily, organisms which were invisible to the naked eye, such as microscopic bugs, could now be controlled. "Excellent." He reached out his hand and caressed her forehead. Unexpectedly, Lily did not move away or roll her eyes at him. Instead, she lowered her head and accepted his compliments. "How is that any good?" Mystery Moon grumbled. "Your Highness, my bedroom is no longer inhabitable. There are bird beak mushrooms everywhere, even on my bed, which now resembles the misty forest after a rain." Lily's cheeks suddenly reddened. She glanced at Mystery Moon and said, I don't know why it would be like this either. At first, the worms couldn't turn into bird beak mushrooms at all, and I even thought that there was a problem with the parent I was using. After I changed the parent, I didn't imagine that the whole house would grow full of mushrooms." When Roland understood the whole story, he could not help but laugh aloud. From the little knowledge of biology he remembered, unlike a seed which could grow into a large tree, a single mushroom spore could not grow into a mushroom, no matter how much assimilation was done. Only after the parent mushroom was changed, 2 spores might combine and grow into mushrooms. The reason why they grew everywhere was likely to be because the parent was discarded within the room, where it drifted around and assimilated bacteria into bird beak mushroom spores. "We shall have a mushroom feast for lunch tomorrow," he announced gleefully. Indubitably, after Lily's second transformation, her ability was no longer limited to sterilization and disinfection. Any observable thing could be wholly transformed for next to no cost, and could be multiplied and expanded like a regular microbe, so as to form a complete microscopic army of its own. Whether it be food production or war preparation, she would be able to play a great role from now onwards. Chapter 760, Land of Fire. Flames spouted out of the ground like monstrous giant trees. The flame tips were the branches, while the billows of thick smoke were the leaves. These trees were interconnected in such a way that they formed a vast black canopy. As Thurum walked underneath these fiery trees, he felt the temperature around him continuously rise. Pea-sized beads of sweat sprung from his forehead, while he felt that his entire back had already turned sticky. This place was a world apart from the cold desert outside, all because the chilly winds of the months of demons had no way to encroach into the core area of Mother Earth. Is this why it's called the Land of Fire? The golden-haired divine lady looked around the place curiously. I never thought there would be such an interesting place in the southernmost region. Having interacted with Iron Axe's party members for a week, Thuram was beginning to know them a little. For example, the divine lady who spoke was called Andrea. Her excellent proficiency in archery was a class apart from even the most seasoned hunter in Sand Nation. There was no doubt that she would be participating in the imminent holy duel alongside the almighty Lady Ashes. Interesting? Ashes puckered her lips. I feel that this place is like a steamer, where any ordinary person would turn into cooked food after just 2 days. I'm not surprised you would say this sort of thing. Andrea shrugged her shoulders. Someone with no taste and style would naturally be unable to appreciate the ambience here. Did you lose your towel? You don't look any stylish with all that sweat on you. Buzz off. Thuram felt a little affinity with Lady Andrea. To him, the most beautiful place in southernmost region was not the Silver Stream oasis where the Majin clan lived and reproduced, but instead, was the flame-spouting Land of Fire as well as the Endless Cape. Although these places were fraught with danger, they also symbolized great strength and were the habitats of the gods, and therefore were the sources of the Irons and people's faith. The former of these places was used to contend for status and power, and was where clans showcased their bravery and tenacity to Mother Earth. The latter was used to make offerings to the sea deity, in hopes that he would bless the clan's people and inject more blood into the Silver Stream so that new oases could form in the desert. The terrain of the Land of Fire was caved downwards, with a slight upward bulge in the middle. Its shape was like that of an inverted basin, and its size could accommodate several iron sand cities. The ever-raging flames had caused the surrounding sand to harden and consolidate, such that walking on the sand felt as though stepping into a palace paved with stone bricks. On both sides of the wide and firm pavement were dark abysses and shafts. The underground fire spouted out of these shafts and continually baked the earth. The most astonishing thing was the colors. The first time any Irons and person walked into this holy ground, they would certainly be fascinated by the gorgeous hues. Beginning from the abysses, the palisades on each side displayed varying tints of a crimson luster, which became darker as they approached the surface. This assortment of colors was akin to that of a carbon stone which had been burned until it was bright red and underwent continuous cooling. However, once the palisades reached the surface, the color abruptly changed into a bright verdure, such that the sand seemed to be paved with a layer of glittering jade stones. The glass-like bodies, which were created through the melting and recrystallization of the gravel, refracted a dazzling glow under the flames. Above that was, of course, the timeless motif of the place, the orange-red raging flames. A dozen pillars of flame spouted out of the basin and, as if to welcome the arrival of a new challenger, encircled the high platform in the central zone, which served as the most important place in the Land of Fire, the site of the holy duel. Here, shades of red and green intermixed, and were further complemented by the underground Blackwater and the faraway Golden Dunes. At first glance, it seemed like all the colors of the desert were gathered in this place. If it wasn't during the months of demons, one could even see the sun rays permeating through the dense smoke in the sky. Only the underwater Endless Cape, which also roared with flames, could compare to this extraordinary sight. I agree that this place is really beautiful, but it would be even better without the fighting and bloodshed. Thuram's new owner and the Princess of Osha, Drow Silvermoon, suddenly spoke. As His Highness Roland said, if it simply remained as a scenic place, it would have been a famous National Natural Park? Another petite divine lady, Hummingbird, suggested. Yes. That's what His Highness said after he checked out Devil's Town behind the Snow Mountain. It's certainly fitting of a king to think exactly like me. Andrea tipped up her chin. Come on, have you ever seen the place he was talking about? Ashes scoffed. It doesn't matter if I didn't because I have a good imagination. From his words alone, I'm sure it's a place of magnificent scenery. Of course, a person with limited experience won't understand. Hey! Whenever Iron Axe or the Divine Ladies spoke, they would inadvertently mention the King of Greycastle's name. Thuram was terribly curious about exactly what kind of person Roland Wimbledon was, that the Irons and people and the divine ladies trusted him this much, particularly the latter. He once heard a traveling merchant comment that the divine ladies revered by the Majin clan were actually evil figures being hunted down by the church in the Four Kingdoms. Yet, judging from the way they spoke of the king, things were considerably different from what the merchant had said. When the party climbed onto the platform, the awaiting Cut-Bone clan warriors started to make hissing noises, while the other clans looked on contemptuously. There was no question that the thunderous might of Iron Sand City had greatly frightened them. It was later on that Thuram learned that the stone castle which the chief of Ironwhip, Rubaka, lived in had collapsed amid the explosions, causing him to perish along with his kin and men. Thus the 6 large clans swiftly became 5, and for a long time, this loss could not be replaced. However, revenge was an unalterable part of the Irons and people's identity. The blood feud between the Ironwhip and Osha clans was no secret. And, as no warrior of a different clan had ever invaded Iron Sand City, Drow Silvermoon's plan for revenge seemed impeccable. Thus, the other clans could only watch on with shock and fear, or otherwise remained as indifferent as possible. What they did not know was that this time, the Osha clan's goal exceeded everyone's imagination. Thuram mused, the Cut-Bone clan is only the beginning. Every one of the clans present will be challenged to a duel sooner or later. They'll either have to try their best or be crushed by Drow Silvermoon. The chief of the Raging Flare clan, who was serving as the duel's arbiter, walked in front of the audience and announced, "May Osha's chief step forth." Drow inhaled a deep breath, took a step forward, and slowly replied, "I am." The former nodded stolidly and continued, "Great. This isn't your first time participating in a holy duel, and thus I expect that you already know the rules. Cut-Bone clan shall be sending out 22 men for this battle. You may start to select weapons for your warriors. While the promise you made to the 3 gods mustn't be broken, you're allowed to give up or surrender at any time. Otherwise, the side with the last man standing will be declared the winner, and be conferred the right to enter Iron Sand City. The duel shall commence when both sides are ready."